we will be here for the duration.
Did you guys run down who the guest list?
No, we don't really.
The guest appearances on our show this
No,
morning?
because I don't really know. It's very fluid, which is kind of what's fun about it.
Is it? Okay. All right.
Yeah. Never know who's going to show up.
But I mean on the hearings.
She meant hearings.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I honestly, I should know.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I'm hearing an echo. Is somebody watching the hearings on some other device?
Nope.
Does anybody else? Yeah.
It might be someone.
Ben Ginsburg, Al Schmidt will be on today. Stepien won't be.
But it's lovely. And I think they'll play video testimony.
Yeah.
Stepien was the one witness that they expected might be somewhat hostile, but they have a deposition. And I think the delay is likely because they wanted to go back and edit the clips from his deposition.
Yeah.
Which they were going to use to keep him honest in the first place.
Right. Kim Marino will be on instead, his Stepien's counsel.
Okay. We're live. Good morning, everybody. Didn't actually know we were live, but we were just talking about what we were going to be talking about anyway. So thanks everybody for being here. We have a little bit of an echo, which hopefully we're going to is going to be fixed, and hopefully you don't, if you're on YouTube, you're not hearing it. But we have about 10 minutes to go before the second hearing of the January 6th Select Committee starts, and I wanted to get your take on what you think was accomplished in the first hearing, and what you think we have to look forward to today. Norm, what do you think it was? Did they knock it out of the park? Did they get on base?
Yeah. I'd say it was an inside the park home run. It was, I think, extraordinarily well done. They actually finished under 2 hours, which was extraordinarily good. It started for the first few minutes a little bit slowly, but I actually thought that Benny Thompson was effective. And, this is not a kind of hearing where people are going to graze and tune in for a few minutes, and if they're bored, go to something else. They got 20 million people. Liz Cheney was spectacular. The film clip with the time codes, I think, was extremely effective. And she laid out the 7 steps that I think are going to be followed through here in the hearings. It was a great predicate for what we're going to see today. The one, if I had done it, I probably would have started with the video. But that's a very mild critique. But what I wish they had done was even more emphasize the depth and breadth of the conspiracy going back a long ways, and take it through the fact that this started even before the election, and then repeat it at the end. I want them to do that all the time. Those of us who are talking here know this. Most of the people out there have not paid close attention, including a lot of those who are fairly involved in political stuff. You want to let them know exactly what you found here and repeat it over and over again. And I think they're going to do that. And today, the fact that they're focusing on the big lie and making it clear that he knew full well that he had lost the election, had planned before it on what to do if he lost, is pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, Brian, I think establishing that as the context for everything going forward was vitally important. And hopefully, we have at least 6 other hearings. They will develop all of those other themes that Norm just talked about, because probably the most vitally important information the American people need to have is just how long-standing and complex and far-reaching this conspiracy was and is. Jenny Thomas.
And to be honest with you, it came out in September in the briefing room, but it was before that even that that Trump had planned all of this. I mean, I don't think he ever planned on giving up power. And you can go back to the 2016 election when, if he didn't win, it was a hoax. I mean, that's always been his driving. He can't admit defeat to begin with, and he'll con anybody he can to stay where he is. And so I think that's coming through, echoing some of what Norm. I would have liked to have seen. Norm, I agree with you on most of what you said about the first hearing. I would have liked to have seen. Honestly, I still go back to, I think they could have been shorter on their opening speeches, but that's a minor thing. We talked about that already. I think the most compelling evidence provided was by Carolyn Edwards, the police officer, and the whole thing when she talks about being knocked out, getting up, going back in, helping people that got pepper sprayed. She got sprayed by bear spray herself, slipping on others' blood. That wasn't, and it's so counter the narrative that the Trump supporters have given, that it was just an active walk on the beach, and it was just another day on the Capitol, and it was just protests, and these were friendly, people until somebody else started the nonsense. That really cuts against that narrative, and it made the GOP fall back to the first narrative they tried to push that was false about there being Antifa, and these were other and Black Lives Matter supporters who actually started it. That was one of the things they pushed out. I would like to see the committee go over all of the BS that we've been told about this, and just a litany of lies that, like you said, what I know, we know it, we were there, and we follow it closely. But for the American public, it's been so hard to discern what's truth and what's fiction. A TikTok, a timeline of the events that they did was important, but it really would be important to run through the lies and say, this is what you said then, this is what you said. I'd like to see that at some point in time. And the planning for this goes back months, and I want to see that as well. This isn't just about January 6th. This is ongoing. You still have people in the Republican Party still pushing the big lie.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how far that goes today, and including the judge that, or the prosecutor, I think it was, that quit, that's supposed to, Pack, who's supposed to testify today because of that. So I'm interested to hear what he has to say, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. And Brian makes a good point, Stephanie, about how part of what this committee needs to do is counter the counter programming that we've been dealing with for months. And, I've heard some people be cynical about the fact that the committee hired professionals to help them put this together. But I thought that because it was so impossible to take in, the attack on the Capitol was so vast and occurred in so many different places, and was really hard to process because of its absolute mind-blowing, surreal quality, that I thought showing the video with the voiceover of Donald talking about how loving and peaceful they all were was a stroke of genius.
I thought it was fantastic. And on that note, because for anyone in your audience that isn't aware, I was a screenwriter for years and years and years. Now I write in podcasts. So, I really looked at that as a pilot episode and it's setting up the story, because we have, what did we learn in those long opening speeches? Well, everybody got set up. We know we are going to find out that there was involvement from the three branches of government, from the executive branch. Hi, Dean. From the legislative and from the judicial. We had interference there. We're going to understand that it goes down to the state levels in terms of the plotting and planning, that they were looking at how do you overthrow an election. It's not just from an insurrection. This was about overthrowing an election. And so you've got to get down into the states. You've got to get into the electoral stuff. You have to have a case and something that's going to get pushed up to the Supreme Court. All of that was structurally planned. Then you have what had to happen at the Pentagon in order for there to be a delay with the National Guard. So you had all those appointments shuffling out. We're going to hear about stuff, those executive orders that go back not just months, but even years, not because that was part of the planning of this, but because it's something that they could pull, that Donald and the lawyers around him, all that corruption could pull out of their hat to say this is going to justify the acts that Donald is taking on this day.
Yeah.
And so that is a big, broad, scopy world that you're delivering to an audience, and you need to set it up. You've got to have key characters that everybody can grab onto. You need to have visuals that are compelling. This is the power of storytelling. And it's how all of history, every pivotal moment that we've had historically as human beings in global societies, it's the storytellers that come in and define it and shape the narrative. And the fact that we'll know that the other side knows this, that Donald and everyone around him knows it, is that Fox News piece, right? Is that what we'll find out about these propagandists, the Alex Jones infosphere, right? Which is huge in Donald's support world.
Right.
That there was coordination with the narrative, with the, we're seeing Sean Hannity texts in the first, right, in the middle of the insurrection, in the first, in the pilot episode of these hearings, which is, this is the series, this is a journey we're on. So I'm very, we all need, and human beings need to take in story that way. We need to have an arc. We need to have a beginning, middle, and end. We need to have rising stakes. There's a reason, there's a structure to storytelling that is consistent. It's because that's how the audience, that's how people viewing this can actually take in the information. And this is such spiritually violent thing that happened to our democracy. It was an real act of violence. And we all felt the violence happening to our country on that level. We've been emotionally traumatized by all this, intellectually traumatized by all this. And so we really need a clear narrative. And the people who are professional at doing that God bless them for coming in and helping. That's an assist. That's a big assist. It's like having an incredible coach come in and say, help people understand what happened. This is how we're going to tell it.
Yeah.
Mary, let me just follow up on one point that Brian made and Stephanie reinforced. Think about what would have happened if we didn't have Carolyn Edwards and the others who were as brave as they were, putting their lives on the line. We would have seen a lot of members of Congress killed. We would have seen Mike Pence hanged. And the fact that they deliberately worked to keep the National Guard from coming shows that a part of the plan was that people would be killed. The vice president would be hanged so that he could invoke the Insurrection Act. And he had his cronies at the Defense Department to mobilize the military for it. The chilling element to this, that it wasn't just sideline Mike Pence so that you can't certify the electors. It was, well, okay, let him kill Nancy Pelosi and a bunch of the other leaders, and then we can step in and take over. It is more chilling.
It's chilling. It sounds great in the room, right? It sounds great in the pitch room. Okay, this is how it's all going to go. And then as it's happening, you got to see people start to freak out because it became real. And oh my God, wait, we got to stop this.
Right. And it's not like they were saying, let's put Mike Pence in a closet for a little bit. And also,
he's been in the closet his whole life.
Well, that's why I said it. But literally, it wasn't just like, let's lock him out and then we'll do our thing. And also, Norm, first of all, it's such a good point. And secondly, think about what else they would have done to some of those women. Dean, I know we don't have you for too much time, so we're just sort of doing a quick retrospect prospect thing, and hopefully you'll be able to come back later. But I'd love to know what you think about how it went and what we can expect, what's working, what needs to be better.
I think your show is working. That's all I can be confident in.
Well, I have kind of amazing guests, if you hadn't noticed. So.
You do. And it's funny, Norm, when I was in college at Fordham years ago, we read books that you had written there.
You made my day, Dean.
So it was very interesting. So it's great to see you here in person. Brian, I've read your stuff. Stephanie, some stuff. But Mary, to me, I think just remind people of Bill Stepien. Bill Stepien's not showing up today because his wife might really be having a baby. I'm not sure. It may be true, maybe not be true. But Bill Stepien is a scumbag. And just so people know, Bill Stepien was big in Bridgegate. He was so bad. I found the quote because I remember in Bridgegate, January 2014, Chris Christie goes out there after these lanes were blocked because the Fort Lee mayor would not endorse Chris Christie. The first person Chris Christie threw under the bus was Bill Stepien. He literally said, I was disturbed by the tone of behavior and attitude of callous indifference that was displayed in the emails by my former campaign manager, Bill Stepien. He said he had a lack of judgment. And he even, Chris Christie literally said he went to the Republican Governors Association, which he headed, and said, don't hire Bill Stepien. And he even said he should not be allowed to run.
So, of course, Donald hires him.
GOP, Jared Kushner found him. He's like, this guy's great.
Yeah.
It was Jared Kushner who found him, and they brought him into the Trump circle. So Bill, I don't know what Bill Stepien is going to say, but if he was going to be hostile like they were suggesting, you know, as a lawyer myself, I would say you don't want that person.
That's
Use
right.
a deposition testimony. It's much better. There's a cleaner story. We're telling a story here. We're beyond fact gathering. This is the story. So you don't need him being evasive and playing games. I think it's better. Anyone slightly going to be hostile, show the deposition. It was under oath. It's better. You can narrate around it as opposed to letting him play his game. So I think it's exciting stuff. Oh, look what it is, John Fugelsang.
Hey, John.
Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. And Dina, along those lines, John, we're just sort of doing a quick prospecting. Along those lines, I think one of the most effective things that they did on Thursday was show video of like damning video depositions of Donald's enablers. You know, I mean, it was much more effective than having, I don't know, me testifying, because how can you argue with that? It really cuts at what they're still trying to do to change the narrative, right?
Well, I think they have to, at some point in time, make the linkage, direct linkage between Donald and his supporters. Supporters said, you know, I'm here because the president told me. How did they tell you? Would he tell you that directly? I mean, that would be the real damning testimony.
Yeah.
And Dean, you said that Stepien was a scumbag. I mean, well, he worked for Trump. Was there any doubt?
He worked for Christie, and then Trump, guy. Look, Trump finds people that are at least ethically malleable. So
yes,
Donald Trump, not Mary. Mary finds the best people. But, you know,
let's just call him Donald. It's so much simpler.
The Donald, the Don, the Teflon Don.
Can we just refer to him as your uncle? Can I just refer to him as your uncle every time? Mary's uncle,
if you must,
destroying this country.
There you go.
No, I can't dispute that. So that's why we're all here, guys.
Is Ivanka joining us today?
I have a feeling that's the last we're going to be hearing from her for quite some time.
With any luck.
With any luck. John, what do you think worked on Thursday, and what you hope they bring more of in the hearing today? Because as Stephanie phrased it, it was sort of like the Thursday hearing was like the pilot.
Yes.
Kind of setting up the rest of the season.
Well, it was like the pilot, and it was filled with lots of teasers for what's going to be featured in upcoming episodes. Right. But I'll tell you, the one thing I walked away from is, they really know how this series is going to end. This is not going to end with season 7 of Lost.
No cliffhanger. That's right. That's right.
Star Wars episode 9. You guys were just making all this up as you went along, weren't you? They actually have a narrative. They know what the third act is going to be. It is being constructed. And, you know, I mean, what are we, 245 years old? There was never a more damning indictment presented against the president than what we saw. And they laid out what their 7 points are going to be. And they already established most of them. I don't know in terms of hard evidence, but Trump spread lies about the election, and he knew they were lies. That's going to be integral to what's coming. I think everything we saw with Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney speaking for 50 minutes in hour 1, oh boy. The points they laid down were so important, that he tried to install his loyalists at DOJ to support his lies, that he was, of course, pressuring Pence to help lie and overturn the election. And can I just say, where are we in the world where not committing treason makes you so praiseworthy? Dean and I haven't committed treason in weeks, and no one compliments us. But Mike, wow.
April.
Well, apparently Mike Pence
sure
deserves the Medal of Freedom simply because he didn't commit treason. It's unbelievable how low the bar. It's like literally at the molten core of the planet.
The bar is so low, Cheney tripped over it in his underground bunker.
And well, at least he brought Dan Quayle back into the discussion for like 2 seconds.
Well, I thought the bar couldn't be any lower than Dan Quayle.
The only other Indiana guy he had to call in.
And if you think about it, he did. Mike Pence did everything he could to get out of doing the right thing, and yet some people are telling us we need to consider him a hero. Oh my goodness gracious. It's quite mind-numbing. Just a quick update. They're starting at 10:45 now.
Okay.
It's taking them a while to put together those video clips,
which is, I think that's good news.
That's good.
I do too.
One other point that we should note here, and it fits in with another theme, which is, other than Mary, a family of grifters. Trump, knowing
my daughter is not a grifter. I just want to be very
Okay.
clear.
I'm sorry.
Two exceptions.
There's more than one. Barron may not yet be a grifter.
I feel sorry for that kid.
I do too.
Knowing that he lost, he raised almost $300 million to contest the election. I'd really like to know where that money went.
He's still raising money, Norm.
And still raising money. And,
off of this.
And by the way,
the first instinct is, how can I make more money out of this?
Always.
Yes.
And
The very
Stepien was
day
gonna
of the
testify
first
about
hearing.
that, by the way.
I'm sorry.
Stepien is supposed to testify about that. I think you're going to see clips. If what we've seen is leaked before this, Stepien's going to talk about that Trump was raising money off it and they knew it was a lie. And that's a minor point. Like, I'm looking at all of this through the eyes of
it's part of
evidence
part of a prosecution.
Yeah, it is part of the evidence.
I'm looking at everything
chain.
as what is the evidence for showing that Donald Trump had committed crime so he could be indicted. You know, Congressman Raskin over the weekend said that he believes there's enough there for an indictment. There clearly is. The burden of proof for an indictment is probable cause. That's just like 51%. For a grand jury, you don't even need unanimous. You just need a majority vote of a grand jury to indict someone. Donald Trump could be indicted on obstruction of Congress, like Judge Carter pointed out. Maybe seditious conspiracy. That's something we talked about Thursday. I was writing about it over the weekend, thinking all we need is one piece of evidence, like one enough, where what the action of the Proud Boys Oath Keepers said, Trump did more than just say it out loud. That there was
and
something.
Dean, they established mens rea, right? This was, he knew exactly what was going on. And even if we didn't have everybody on the planet, including Bill Barr and Ivanka, testifying under oath that they told him the election wasn't stolen, a cat
well, that was all for the
cameo
corruptly
is
part.
that also he said before the election several times, even, no matter what happens, I'm going to say it was stolen.
Yes, you said that to my face.
To your face.
23rd.
I think
it brings up two points. One, Norm, on the raising money. It is interesting to note, on the day of the first hearing, while we're discussing the possible attempted coup, the failed coup, that Donald Trump was sending out emails encouraging everyone to buy Trump Memorial golf balls because he hit a hole-in-one at some golf course. So I got 5 pleas from him on that day to buy limited edition Trump golf balls. And I guess, Dean, to what you were saying, I think that at the end of the day, what all of this is motive and ties to what went on and how it's a trail of crime. So
if I may, I do think that it's all about the fundraising. I am having no expectations of Trump ever seeing the inside of a jail cell. We'd all like to see orange clash with orange. But I think when you consider no one went to prison for Iran-Contra, no one went to jail for the lies that led to the Iraq war, Donald Trump's penance, the price he will pay will be very different. His karmic penalty will happen in real time in front of us in the form of him shoveling money to defense attorneys and having to offload real estate holdings for the rest of his life. That's going to be the karmic penance. But it is worth noting how Rupert Murdoch has cut him loose. The Wall Street Journal, Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it. And then the New York Post. The New York Post is my God, the most racist paper in America. Trump has become a prisoner of his own ego. He can't admit that his tweeting and narcissism turned off millions. He won't stop insisting that 2020 was stolen, even though he's offered no proof that it's true. Trump can't look past 2020. Let him remain there. He's lost Rupert. And
John,
so
I know Fox News isn't covering the hearings.
Right.
So we're not going to see the hearings.
Well, they're in the hearings, so that's why.
Hannity on Fox News, yes.
Well, the big question is, and I guess, Dean, that goes to, and I asked it the other night, do you think, and John, same thing as Stephanie and Norm, and Mary, you think the indictment comes down prior to the midterm election?
Not from this.
Yeah, but
hopefully from Georgia.
Georgia will come first, and that's partly why the U.S. attorney from the Northern District of Georgia is there. But the Justice Department actually has a lot more information that the committee doesn't have. They've gathered a lot of stuff. The seditious conspiracy charges against the Proud Boys really tell us that they're serious about moving forward.
Yeah.
And my guess is it will happen beforehand. But the other part of John's karma is you notice that the governor of Arkansas has now cut loose from Trump. That's a kind of cutting edge. The worst thing that Trump could see happening is that the Republican Party now basically says, we don't want you anymore. If he loses that, that's going to be a horrible blow to him. He's going to lose a good part of that base. It's not enough, but it's a nice little additional cut to
how the cult works.
Back.
Ron DeSantis will tell them they can cut Trump loose. The way Trump finally told them they could cut Bush loose.
That's right. And I think that's been happening for a long time. I think the Republicans learned a while ago, especially as the New York Post of all papers, it's just amazing since Donald's had the Post in his pocket since like 1978. But
doing strange things with it while they've been there.
Let's not go there. But that they've known for a while now, especially since Donald wouldn't move on and won't move on, that so-called Trumpism can survive him. And that makes all of this even more interesting. And John, to your point, what Donald has done is worse than everything else combined in terms of the kinds of behavior. Obviously, I think Nixon and Vietnam is worse, and in some ways, and Bush and Iraq is worse.
Iran-Contra, don't leave that out.
Right, and Iran-Contra. But Donald's killed more Americans than any other president. Right. He is more corrupt. He's destroyed. He tried to destroy our institutions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he should be in prison for the rest of his life. However, I'll settle for his never being able to run for anything again, and hope that the civil litigations just bankrupt him.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I think Nixon and Reagan set the table, and it was merely Donald Trump who sat at the table that they set. So
I'm not blaming. I'm not saying.
I think those were horrible people.
They all had Roger Stone, standing right
Roger
behind them.
Ailes.
But if you look at the totality of what has any of them ever tried to overthrow the United States government? I'm talking specifically about this crime.
I'm sorry. I just want to see Trump lose the popular vote for a third time.
He's not going to run again.
We can't risk it.
Here's Fox News. Look, it's the Fox News guy.
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun.
All right, here we go.
Interesting.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing. Good morning. Last week, the Select Committee laid out a preview of our initial findings about the conspiracy overseen and directed by Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and block the transfer of power, a scheme unprecedented in American history. My colleagues and I don't want to spend time talking about ourselves during these hearings, but as someone who's run for office a few times, I can tell you at the end of a campaign, it all comes down to the numbers. The numbers tell you the winner and the loser. For the most part, the numbers don't lie. But if something doesn't add up with the numbers, you go to court to get resolution. And that's the end of the line. We accept those results. That's what it means to respect the rule of law. That's what it means to seek elective office in our democracy. Because those numbers aren't just numbers, they're votes. They're your votes. They are the will and the voice of the people. and the very least we should expect from any person seeking a position of public trust is the acceptance of the will of the people, win or lose. Donald Trump didn't. He didn't have the numbers, he went to court. He still didn't have the numbers, he lost. But he betrayed the trust of the American people. He ignored the will of the voters. He lied to his supporters and the country. And he tried to remain in office after the people had voted him out, and the courts upheld the will of the people. This morning, we'll tell the story of how Donald Trump lost an election and knew he lost an election, and as a result of his loss, decided to wage an attack on our democracy, an attack on the American people by trying to rob you of your voice in our democracy. And in doing so, lit the fuse that led to the horrific violence of January 6th, when a mob of his supporters stormed the Capitol sent by Donald Trump to stop the transfer of power. Today, my colleague from California, Ms. Lofgren, and our witnesses will detail the Select Committee's findings on these matters. But first, I will recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Good framing, yes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Last week, as
Court
the
stuff,
chairman
very
noted,
good.
our committee began outlining a 7-part plan overseen by President Trump to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we will begin looking at the initial part of that plan. President Trump's effort to convince millions of Americans that the election was stolen from him by overwhelming fraud. A federal court has already reviewed elements of the committee's evidence on this point and said this, quote, "In the months following the election, numerous credible sources from the president's inner circle to agency leadership and statisticians informed President Trump and Dr. Eastman that there was no evidence of election fraud," close quote, sufficient to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The court's opinion methodically documents each of the principal reasons for that conclusion, and I would urge all those watching to read it. Today, we will begin to show the American people some of our evidence. Today, you will hear much more from former Attorney General Bill Barr's recorded testimony, and you will hear in greater detail what others in the department told President Trump, that his claims of election fraud were nonsense. You will also hear much more from President Trump's own campaign
Bill
experts.
Barr had another word for that.
That also concluded that his fraud claims could not be supported. Let me focus briefly on just 3 points now. First, you will hear firsthand testimony that the president's campaign advisors urged him to await the counting of votes and not to declare victory on election night. The president understood even before the election that many more Biden voters had voted by mail because President Trump ignored the advice of his campaign experts and told his supporters only to vote in person. Donald Trump knew before the election that the counting of those mail-in ballots in several states would not begin until late in the day and would not be complete for multiple days. This was expected, reported, and widely known. You will also hear testimony that President Trump rejected the advice of his campaign experts on election night and instead followed the course recommended by an apparently inebriated Rudy Giuliani.
Hey now.
And insist that the vote
Is there another kind?
To falsely claim everything was fraudulent.
Is there times when he's sober?
That the election was not legitimate.
Only when his hair dye started running.
Fraud.
Chef's
Millions of Americans believed him. Second, pay attention to what Donald Trump and his legal team said repeatedly about Dominion voting machines. Far-flung conspiracies with a deceased Venezuelan communist allegedly pulling the strings. This was, quote, complete nonsense, as Bill Barr said. President Trump's own campaign advisors, his Department of Justice, and his cybersecurity experts all told him the same thing. Here, for example, is White House lawyer Eric Hirschman His view was shared by many of the Trump team whom we interviewed.
I thought the Dominion stuff was, I never saw any evidence whatsoever to sustain those allegations.
And third, as Mike Pence's staff started to get a sense for what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th, they called the campaign experts to give them a briefing on election fraud and all the other election claims. On January 2nd, the general counsel of the Trump campaign, Matthew Morgan, this is the campaign's chief lawyer, summarized what the campaign had concluded weeks earlier, that none of the arguments about fraud or anything else could actually change the outcome of the election.
Generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
Is drinking Diet Coke compulsory with these people?
This was before the attack on the Capitol.
Only
Trump
when it's laced with
campaign legal
Adderall.
team knew there was no legitimate argument, fraud, irregularities, or anything to overturn the election. And yet President Trump went ahead with his plans for January 6th anyway. Mr. Chairman, hundreds of our countrymen have faced criminal charges. Many are serving criminal sentences because they believed what Donald Trump said about the election and they acted on it. They came to Washington, D.C. at his request. They marched on the Capitol at his request. And hundreds of them besieged and invaded the building at the heart of our constitutional republic. As one conservative editorial board put it recently, quote, Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it. Another conservative editorial board that has long supported President Trump said last week, Donald Trump, quote, won't stop insisting that 2020 was stolen, even though he has offered no proof that that is true. And this, Donald Trump now, quote, clings to more fantastical theories, such as Dinesh D'Souza's debunked 2,000 mules.
Oh, that's my drinking game
recounts
word.
in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin confirm Trump lost. Those are the correct conclusions to draw from the evidence gathered by this committee. We have much more evidence to show the American people on this point than we can reasonably show in one hearing. But today, we will begin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Nicely done.
Great.
Nicely done.
Without objection. Without objection.
Can we convict now? Can we just
Chair
convict him?
recognizes Joan
Let's
go to the
Vote.
verdict.
Can we vote? I'm
Ms.
ready.
Lofgren for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our opening hearing, we gave an overview of our investigation into the January 6th attack. The plot to overthrow the election was complex and had many parts, which we'll explore in remaining hearings. But today, we examine the false narrative that the 2020 election was, quote, stolen. Former President Trump's plan to overturn the election relied on a sustained effort to deceive millions of Americans with knowingly false claims of election fraud. All elements of the plot relied on convincing his supporters about these false claims. Today, we'll demonstrate the 2020 election was not stolen. The American people elected President Joe Biden. We'll present evidence that Mr. Trump's claims of election fraud were false, that he and his closest advisors knew those claims were false, but they continued to peddle them anyway, right up until the moments before a mob of Trump supporters attacked the Capitol. We'll also show that the Trump campaign used these false claims of election fraud to raise hundreds of millions of dollars from supporters who were told their donations were for the legal fight in the courts. But the Trump campaign didn't use the money for that. The big lie was also a big ripoff. The former president laid the groundwork for these false claims well in advance of the election.
Maybe you get the mail fraud.
As early as
Yeah.
April 2020, Mr. Trump claimed that the only way he could lose an election would be as a result of fraud.
Yeah,
You know the things with bundling and all of the things that are happening with votes by mail, where thousands of votes are gathered, and I'm not going to say which party does it, but thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win.
The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. Did you see what's going on? Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. This is a horrible thing for our country. This is not going to end well.
Mr. Trump decided even before the election that regardless of the facts and the truth, if he lost the election, he would claim it was rigged. Mr. Trump was right about one thing. It did not end well. On election night, Mr. Trump claimed even before the votes were counted that his loss was a result of fraud. Now, Thursday, we had testimony from Attorney General Barr about the Department of Justice investigation of Mr. Trump's fraud claims. Barr told Trump directly that his claims were BS. Yet, after hearing the truth and that warning from the AG, Mr. Trump continued to peddle the false claims of fraud. You'll hear detailed testimony from Attorney General Barr describing the various election fraud claims the Department of Justice investigated. He'll tell you how he told Mr. Trump repeatedly that there was no merit to those claims. Mr. Barr will tell us that Mr. Trump's election night claims of fraud were made without regard to the truth and before it was even possible to look for evidence of fraud. Attorney General Barr wasn't alone. You'll see and hear today other Department of Justice officials and senior advisors to Mr. Trump that they told him the claims he was making were not supported by evidence. The election fraud claims were false. Mr. Trump's closest advisors knew it. Mr. Trump knew it. That didn't stop him from pushing the false claims and urging his supporters to, quote, fight like hell, to, quote, take back their country. After he lost the election, various legal challenges were made. You'll hear testimony today from a renowned Republican election litigation lawyer who will explain the normal process by which candidates challenge an election. Rather than accept the results of the election and the decisions of the courts, Mr. Trump pursued a different strategy. He tried to convince the American people the election had been stolen. Many of his supporters believed him, and many still believe him today. The attack on January 6th was a direct and predictable result of Mr. Trump's decision to use false claims of election fraud to overturn the election and to cling to power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I like Democrats who don't pull punches.
Well done.
Thank you very much. I now welcome our first witness. We're joined today by former Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt. Bill Stepien, President Trump's former campaign manager, was subpoenaed to be here and was in Washington this morning, prepared to testify. Kevin Marino, Mr. Stepien's attorney, is here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Marino, for coming. And he has advised us that Mr. Stepien's wife went into labor this morning. Mr. Stepien unexpectedly had to travel to be with his wife, and we wish him the best.
And her labor.
I want to see an umbilical cord.
Thursday.
Rigor of our investigation.
Show me the umbilical cord.
With
I don't
several
believe it.
hours of Mr. Stepien's
It was
testimony
induced labor.
from when we interviewed him in
She's
February.
only 6 months pregnant.
We will be presenting that
She's not even
testimony
pregnant.
today. I'll now swear in our
I hope
witness.
it's true.
The witness
honestly.
will please stand and raise his right hand.
We both feign childbirth to get out of parties.
We swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
That's an
So help
image.
you God.
Every Fox anchor's worst
Thank you.
nightmare right here.
You may be
Yep.
seated.
That's it. This testimony is brought
Let
to
the
you by
record
My
reflect
Pillow.
the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. I want to start by showing a video that tells the story of what was going on in the Trump White House on election night in November of 2020.
Really?
Do you remember where you were on the night of the election, November the 3rd?
I was at the White House.
You know where specifically over the course of that night you spent your time within the White House?
There was an event that was organized in the residence, so I moved between
an event.
Almost real.
Residence, a room
So
sort
natural.
of off the residence, where some family
Almost
members
human.
were.
I take it
She
the
got the
president was
shares.
upstairs in
Oh.
the residence.
He was upstairs. We were kind of on the first floor, so not upstairs. We were with mostly with Ivanka and her
Dark
brothers
shadows?
and a couple other people who'd be coming in and out.
Can you just describe the atmosphere? What were people expecting that night when you got to the White House?
I think that there was typically for people who show up there on election night, it's going to be a self-select,
Oh, hello.
more positive environment. I think people were a little
It's
bit
Bane
nervous not knowing
from Batman.
what was going to happen with the.
I think he'll do anything to cover that
Red
chin.
Mirage is a
Yeah.
great-
I know, wearing a mask. Jeez.
The Fox News Decision Desk is calling Arizona for Joe Biden. That is a big get for the Biden campaign.
Arizona's called. Do you remember that?
I do.
What do you remember happening where you were when Arizona was called?
I shit myself.
There was surprise at the call.
Like
Who
I
was
said.
surprised?
Most everyone in the room.
Were you being one of them?
Yes.
Did that shift the atmosphere or the attitude in the White House?
Completely.
How so? Can you describe that?
Because Fox News was the first one to go out and say that.
So was it anger kind of directed towards Fox News for making a call more so than like disappointment that maybe the campaign lost Arizona?
All the above.
So both anger and disappointment.
Both disappointed with Fox and concerned that maybe our data or our numbers weren't accurate.
Were you in the White House residence during the sort of past midnight into the early morning hours of November 4th?
Yes, oh sure, it went over beyond midnight, yes.
Do you remember Rudy Giuliani being at the White House on election night and into the early hours the next morning?
I do.
What do you remember about when he came?
He was drunk off his ass.
What does he remember about the night he came?
Yeah, that's
right.
He was, I had heard that he was upstairs, in that aforementioned reception area. And he was looking to talk to the president. And it was suggested instead that he come talk to several of us down off the map room.
You said that you had heard that Mr. Giuliani wanted to talk to the president and then he was directed your way. Did you end up talking to Mr. Giuliani when he was directed your way?
I did.
What was that conversation?
A lot of conversations were directed my way. A few of us, myself, Jason Miller, Justin Clark, and Mark Meadows, gathered in a room off the map room to listen to whatever Rudy presumably wanted to say to the president.
Was there anyone in that conversation who, in your observation, had too much to drink?
Whoa!
Whoa! This is better.
We've covered this beat.
Tell me more about that. What was your observation about his?
Jason Miller.
Forget January 6th.
Listen.
During that discussion about what the president should say when he's addressed the nation on election night.
And the mayor was definitely intoxicated, but I do not know that his level of intoxication when he spoke with the president, for example.
Were you part of any discussions with
can't measure
the people I mentioned, Mr. Stepien, Mr. Meadows, or anyone else, about whether the president should make any sort of speech on election night?
I mean, I spoke to the president. They may have been present.
Drunk.
but President spoke to the president several times that night.
There were suggestions
Clowns.
by
Not the president of the United States.
Mayor Giuliani to go and declare victory and say that we won it outright.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were still going to be counted for days. And it was far too early to be making any proclamation like that.
I remember saying that, to the best of my memory, I was saying that we should not go and declare victory until we had a better sense of the numbers.
Okay, can you be more specific about that conversation, in particular what Mayor Giuliani said, your response, and then anybody else in the room's response?
I think effectively Mayor Giuliani was saying, we won it. They're stealing it from us. Where'd all the votes come from? We need to go say that we won. And essentially that anyone who didn't agree with that position was being weak.
What was your view?
That's how
at
you
the time
manipulate
as to
them.
what he should or shouldn't say?
I don't know that I had a firm view as to what he should say.
This is
In
Giuliani
that
saying it, though,
circumstance,
right?
The results were still being counted. It was becoming clear that the race would not be called on election night.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we
be proud of it.
Think we're in good position, and we'll have more to say about this, the next day or the next day, whenever we had something to say.
And did anybody
It's the
who was
origin
a part
story
of that
for the big
conversation
lie.
disagree with
French thing.
your message?
Yes.
Who is that?
The president disagreed with that. I don't recall the particular words. He thought I was wrong. He told me so, and that they were gonna, go he was gonna go in a different direction.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
But then people voted and screwed it up.
Yeah.
How dare they?
Oh, God.
Damn voters.
Mr. Steiwalt, did President Trump have any basis to declare victory on November 4th, 2020? Thank you. Mr. Stepien also testified that President Trump had no basis for declaring victory at that point in time.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we.
You infected everybody at a debate by lying about positive, negative tests.
In good
So
position.
proud.
And we'll have more to say about this, the next day or the next day, whenever we had something to say.
This guy always got picked last for kickball.
Thank you.
We'll have more to
Steiwalt,
say unless
after
my
the
wife
votes
goes into
were
labor.
counted,
Yeah.
Who won the presidential election of 2020?
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. of the great state of Delaware.
Mic drop.
Thank you.
Damn.
That's the bottom line.
No
We've
further
had an
questions.
election. Mr.
We're
Trump
done.
lost.
I'm done with
but
this
he
witness.
refused to accept the results
I had enough
the
of this
democratic
guy.
process. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Steiwalt, I'd like you to explain a term that was thrown around a lot during the election, and that's the so-called Red Mirage. What does that mean?
Red Mirage.
So in the 40 or 50 years, let's say, that Americans have increasingly chosen to vote by mail or early or absentee, Democrats prefer that method of voting more than Republicans do.
That's right.
So
They
basically,
do.
in every election, Republicans win election day and Democrats win the early vote. And then you wait and start counting. And it depends on which ones you count first, but usually it's election day votes that get counted first. And you see the Republicans shoot ahead. And then the process of bailing and binding and unbinding all those mail-in votes. And some states like Pennsylvania refuse to count the votes first. So you have to wait for all of that to come in. So in every election, and certainly a national election, you expect to see the Republican with a lead, but it's not really a lead. When you put together a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't matter which piece you put in first. It ends up with the same image. So for us,
Nice analogy.
who cares? But that's because no candidate had ever tried to avail themselves of this quirk in the election counting system.
They knew this
We
too. They
had
talked
gone
about it a
to
lot.
pains,
Trump inside that
and I'm
campaign.
proud of the pains
All
we went to
politicians know this.
make sure
Part of
that
their
we were
strategy.
informing viewers that this was going to happen, because the Trump campaign and the president had made it clear that they were going to try to exploit this anomaly. And we knew it was going to be bigger because the percentage of early votes was higher, right? We went from about 45% of the votes being early and absentee to, because of the pandemic, that increased by about 50%. So we knew it would be longer. We knew it would be more.
So
we
attack
wanted
the
to keep
post
telling
office.
viewers,
Postal
hey,
service.
look, the number that you see here is
Or
sort
the
of
reporter.
irrelevant because it's
They
only a small
tried.
percentage of these
They
votes.
tried.
So this Red Mirage, that's really what you expect.
And Lou Joy still has a job.
Happens every
Yeah.
time.
Thank
Happens
you, Mr.
every
Steinerwald.
time.
Now, I'd like to play a clip of Attorney General Bill Barr, who also explains
Dun,
what
dun,
was
dun.
expected to happen on
He should have his own
election
theme
night.
music when he comes up.
Yeah.
Right out of the
Thunder.
box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence. And it
In
seemed
September.
to be based on the dynamic that that at the end of the evening, a lot of Democratic votes came in, which changed the vote counts in certain states. And that seemed to be the basis for this broad claim that there was major fraud. And I didn't think much of that because people had been talking for weeks and everyone understood for weeks that that was going to be what happened on election night.
Mr. Stepien obviously could not be with us today, and it's proper for him to be with his wife as they welcome their child. But he also had discussions with the president about the Red Mirage. That is, that it would be a long night and that early votes would favor him, but that lots more votes would be counted over the course of the night and the days after. So let's play clip 1 from our interview with Mr. Stepien.
I recounted back to that conversation with him, in which I said, just like I said in 2016 was going to be a long night. I told him in 2020 that it was going to be a process again, as the early returns are going to be positive, and we're going to be watching the returns of ballots as they rolled in thereafter.
So
is it fair to say you're trying to present what you thought would be a realistic picture of what might happen over the course of that night, being election night?
That night and the days that followed. Yeah, I always told the president the truth, and I think he expected that from me, and I told him it was going to be a process. It was going to be, we're going to have to wait and see how this turned out. So I just like I did in 2016, I did the same thing in 2020.
So let's watch a short clip of President Trump speaking after he received that information from his campaign advisors.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list.
So when former President Trump said that, it contradicted what his advisors had warned would happen. We all know that mail-in ballots played an important role in the 2020 election. However, President Trump continuously discouraged mail-in voting. Mr. Stepien was so concerned about the president's position on mail-in voting that in the summer of 2020, he met with President Trump along with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Let's play clip 4.
Meeting that was had, in particular, I invited Kevin McCarthy to join the meeting, he being of like mind on the issue with me, in which we made our case for why we believed mail-in voting not to be a bad thing for his campaign. But the president's mind was made up, and you understand, how many times to, go to the well on a particular topic.
Yeah, I understand. Tell me a little bit more about the argument that you and Mr. McCarthy made to the president in that meeting as to why it wasn't a bad thing that mail-in voting was available.
Kevin McCarthy.
Pillars to that argument, both of which I've previously mentioned. One, leaving a good deal to chance, pushing or urging your voters to vote only on election day leaves a lot to chance. That's A. And B, also previously mentioned, the fact that the Trump campaign, Republican National Committee, Republican Party had an advantage of grassroots workers and volunteers on the ground that would allow, an advantage to enhance return rates of ballots that were mailed. Those were the two pillars of the argument.
I see. And what, if anything, do you recall Representative McCarthy saying during that meeting?
We were echoing the same argument. I mean, his words echoed mine, and vice versa on those two topics.
Yeah, Donald wanted people to vote in person during a
Mr.
pandemic.
Stirewalt, you were at the decision desk at Fox News on election night, and you called Arizona early for President Biden, which was controversial. How did you make that call, and where did you think the race stood in the early hours of the next day?
Well, it was really controversial to our competitors who we beat so badly by making it first. Our decision desk was the best in the business, and I was very proud to be a part of it. Because we had partnered with the Associated Press and the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago.
He knows, he gets
thanks
it.
to my colleague and friend
Just
Arne in
the
Michigan,
facts.
had built a wonderful device for forecasting the outcomes of elections. So we had a different set of data than our competitors did. We had more research, and we had a better system, and we had a great team. So what you're waiting to see is, do the actual votes match up with the expectations in the poll? The real votes are testing the quality of your poll in targeted precincts and in targeted places. And let me tell you, our poll in Arizona was beautiful, and it was doing just what we wanted it to do, and it was cooking up just right. And at some point, and I forget exactly who.
Oh, he's delivering on every level.
It became clear that Arizona was getting ready to make a call. So we my boss, Bill Salmon, said, we're not making any call until everybody says yes, because that was always our policy, unanimity. And you have to understand, in this room, you have, the best people from academia, Democrats, Republicans, a broad cross-section of people who had worked together for a decade, who were really serious about this stuff. So we knew it would be a consequential call because it was one of 5 states that really mattered, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona were the ones that we were watching. We knew it would be significant to call any one of those 5, but we already knew Trump's chances were very small and getting smaller based on what we had seen. So we were able to make the call early. We were able to beat the competition. We looked around the room, everybody says yay, and on we go. And by the time we found out how much everybody was freaking out and losing their minds over this call, we were already trying to call the next state. We had already moved on. We were in Georgia, we were in North Carolina, we were looking at these other states.
What's his first name?
We thought we were pleased,
Mister.
but not surprised.
I see.
Not
You know, after the
controversial. They
election,
were
as
right.
of November
Yeah.
7th, in your judgment, what were the
I love him.
chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point,
Yes.
none. I mean, I guess it's always possible that you could have, a truckload of ballots be found somewhere, I suppose. But once you get into this space, ahead of today, I thought
You
about
tried.
what are the largest margins that could ever be overturned by a recount, and the kind of stuff that we heard Mike Pence talking about, sounding like a normal Republican that night when he said, we'll keep every challenge. Nothing like that. In a recount, you're talking about hundreds of votes. When we think about calling a race, one of the things that we would think about is it outside the margin of a recount? And when we think about that margin, we think about, in modern history, you're talking about 1,000 votes, 1,500 votes at the way, way outside. Normally, you're talking about hundreds of votes, maybe 300 votes that are going to change. So the idea that through any normal process in any of these states, remember, he had to do it thrice, right? He needed 3 of these states to change. And in order to do that, I mean, you're at an infant, you're better off to play the Powerball than to have that comment.
On November 7th, the other major news
he's
outlets called
fantastic.
the race for
Thrice.
President Biden.
You're
Now,
better
Mr.
off with the
Stepien
Powerball.
told the committee that he thought the odds were, and this is a quote, very, very, very bleak, and held a meeting with the president that same day. Let's show clip 8, video clip 8.
I mean, with each day that we're on, I mean, the trajectory of the race, on election night, Trump ahead in many states. And as that week wore on, as the 3rd became the 4th, became the 5th, and so on and so forth, and the vote by mail ballots were tabulated, Trump's lead.
That's the picture where he looks like corrupt Agent Petty from Ozark.
And in
Yes.
some places, Biden surpassed.
That's
Trump
one to me where he looks like Kate
totals.
McKenna.
So as the week wore on, as we paid attention to those numbers multiple times a day, internally, I was feeling less confident.
Just happy he's not willing to lie
What was
under
your
oath.
view on the state of the election at that point?
Very, very, very bleak. We told him, the group that went over there outlined, my belief in chances for success at this point, and then we pegged it at 5, maybe 10% based on recounts that either were automatically initiated or could be initiated based on realistic legal challenges, not all the legal challenges that eventually were pursued. But it was my belief is that it was a very, very 5 to 10%. It's not a very good optimistic outlook.
Now, as President Trump and others continued to claim that the election was stolen, there were lawyers who were a part of the campaign lawyers
Here
who
we go.
were responsible for investigating the fraud claims. That includes Alex Cannon, who could not validate the claims that were being made, including those being made by the president. Let's roll video 15. 13.
This is an email. It's 2 emails, actually. The first is from Alex Cannon to you and Faith McPherson. And then you forward that email on to Mark Meadows, Justin Clark, and Jason Miller, the subject being AZ Federal ID voters. If you look at the original email there, it says, Bill, we completed the AZ analysis you requested. I assume that's about Arizona. And because of the substantial uncertainty surrounding the databases, this is a highly unreliable way to identify ineligible voters. Can you explain the task that you gave to Ms. Cannon for this Arizona analysis?
Sure. Previously, I described some of my frustration with some of the claims that people would throw at President Trump regarding, need to look at this, this happened in this state or that happened in that state. And it would be, those would flow to us to look into. I talked about that before, I think.
Yep.
You know, this is an example of that. I recall in Arizona, someone had thrown out, I believe this to be the claim, that there were thousands of illegal citizens, people not eligible to vote, having cast their ballots in Arizona. Someone had thrown out that claim to President Trump. And with, you know, the margins being as close as they were, as I previously described, you know, that could potentially matter. So this wild claim is thrown out, which, you know, on its face didn't seem, you know, realistic or possible to me. I asked Alex to look at the, you know, the claim, and I haven't read this full email, but I recall the response to that. The reality of that was not illegal citizens voting in the election. I think it was like overseas voters voting in the election. So obviously, you know, people who were eligible to vote.
When these findings were passed up the chain to President Trump, he became frustrated and he replaced the campaign's legal team. Let's play clip 14.
You know, I think the president, it was during the second week where things like you displayed were occurring, where he was, you know, growing increasingly unhappy with, you know, his team, you know, me, less so because I was less involved at this point, but still you were. Me, growing increasingly unhappy with Justin Clark, and that kind of, you know,
countdown to a Truth Social post of how they were all losers.
Losers,
losers. I got rid of them.
Campaign and
got rid of them. They're not good.
Campaign at that point.
Didn't know how to fight.
Putting Giuliani
Now,
in charge.
when Mr.
Says it all.
Stepien became campaign manager, he was the second Trump campaign manager for the 2020 race, and there were only about 115 days until Election Day. So let's play the video.
I inherited a campaign that was, the day I was hired was, I believe, President Trump's low point in the 2020 daily average polling against President Biden. It was a campaign at a low point in the polls. It was structurally and fiscally deficient. There was a great deal wrong with the campaign in both of those areas.
It was fucked up.
So most of my day spent fixing and I think I took over with 115 days left in the campaign. Most of my time spent fixing the things that could be fixed with 115 days left in the campaign.
Now, Mr. Stepien has been in the campaign field for a long time, and he worked for lots of different candidates and campaigns. He testified to this committee about his concerns given the claims that Mr. Giuliani and Ms. Powell and their team were making publicly. Let's play clip 15.
Okay, and was it important for you, Mr. Stepien, to sort of pull back just for your own professional reputation? You didn't want to be associated with some of what you were hearing from the Giuliani team and others that sort of stepped in the wake of your departure?
I didn't mind being categorized. There were two groups of, we called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal, as reporters kind of started to do around that point in time.
Get her.
Said,
he wasn't in on the drunk Rudy. No drunk
I've
Rudy.
been doing this for a long time, 25 years.
There's the Green Bay sweep, and there's the drunk Rudy.
Political ideologies from Trump to McCain to Bush to Christie, and I could work under a lot of circumstances for a lot of varied, candidates and politicians. But a situation where and I think along the way I built up a pretty good, I hope, a good reputation for being honest and professional. And I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time. So that led to me stepping away.
Wow.
So the president did get rid of Team Normal, and I'd like to play a clip showing that the president found the people he needed to perpetuate his claims of fraud.
Team Abnormal.
They saw a big truck bringing in 100,000 ballots in garbage cans, in waste paper baskets, in cardboard boxes, and
Made
in
out of
shopping
bamboo.
baskets. And every single one of them was
the
provided because they were being notified by Smartmatic in Frankfurt that Biden was way behind and they better come up with a lot more ballots. And we can prove every single thing I just said.
You gave me the paper ballots.
What a lion
I could
sack.
probably turn around each one of these states.
So
By the way,
crazy.
Rudy had control of the headroom
If
in
you
this
let me
framing. He
examine
chose
each
to
one of
live
those
like
ballots, I pull out enough that were
this.
fraudulent
Nosferatu.
that it would shake the hell out of the country.
It can set.
I just
run
can't
an
see him anymore
algorithm
without thinking of the
probably
Barat
ran
movie.
all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes
Kraken is
from President
speaking.
Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm. I remember that one of the things Mark said at some point was, you can't
doesn't
show
happen,
an
by the way,
actual
everybody.
vote was flipped, which I found at the time to be a remarkable assertion, because
Yes.
you
Yes.
don't have to have the gun to see the body lying on the floor bleeding out with 5 bullet holes in it was killed by a gun.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And the theory was also completely nuts. Right? I mean, it was a combination of Italian.
I know it doesn't
Germans.
matter,
I mean,
but-
different things have been floating
What's
around
happening behind him?
as to who was involved. Remember, Hugo
Stand up.
Chavez and the Venezuelan. She has an affidavit
And
from
a-
somebody who
A
says
shower
they
tap.
wrote a software
Shower
in and
tap.
something. with
He's in like a
Philippines.
Home
Just
Depot
all over the
display.
radar.
Did you ever share, Mr.
perhaps
Kushner, your view of
bathroom.
Mr. Giuliani? Did you ever share your perspective about him with the president?
It's weird.
I guess
Say it.
yes.
Tell me what you said.
Basically, not the approach I would take if I was you.
Okay. And how did he react? How did President Trump react when
What
you
a
shared
hero.
that view with him?
We said, I have confidence in Rudy.
I think I had conversations with probably all of our council who are signed up to assist on election day as they disengaged with the campaign. The general consensus was that law firms were not comfortable making the arguments that Rudy Giuliani was making publicly. I seem to recall that I had a similar conversation with most all of them.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it. And that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
Even Sidney Powell, defending herself in a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems, argued that, quote, no reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Unbelievable.
I thank the witness for joining us today. The first panel is now dismissed.
Oh, we gave a wink.
were
Don't do
good.
that. He was great, but ugh.
Can I say more about our great polling?
Yeah.
By the way, we have great polling. The rest of you suck, and we did a really good job.
I'm also available for future election. Hello, guys.
By the way, I need a job.
Recognizes the gentlewoman
Exactly.
from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, we presented the testimony of former Attorney General Bill Barr who testified before this committee. Today, we present additional evidence, including his testimony that former President Trump started making claims of election fraud immediately after the election, and that Barr concluded the claims were untrue. Now, due to the length of Attorney General Barr's testimony, we're only going to include relevant portions at the hearing today. So let's play the video.
The department, in fact, when we received specific and credible allegations of fraud, made an effort to look into these to satisfy ourselves that they were without merit. And I was in the posture of trying to figure out, there was an avalanche of all these allegations of fraud that built up over a number of days. And it was like playing whack-a-mole, because something would come out one day and then the next day it would be another issue. Also, I was influenced by the fact that all the early claims that I understood were completely bogus and silly, and usually based on complete misinformation. And so I didn't consider the quality of claims right out of the box to give me any feeling that there was really substance here.
It's not like I'm getting Iran-Contra criminals off.
For the first time since the election, the Attorney General spoke personally with the President on November 23rd, and this was at the White House. Let's play the video, please.
So on November 23rd, I hadn't spoken to the President since the election, and in fact, as I said, since the middle of October, roughly. And it was a little getting awkward, because obviously he had lost the election and I hadn't said anything to him. And so Cipollone said, I think it's time you come over here. And so I came over to meet with the President in the Oval Office, and Meadows and Cipollone were there. And the President, and this is leading up to this conversation with Kushner, the President said there had been major fraud, and that as soon as the facts were out, the results of the election would be reversed. And he went on this for quite a while, as he's prone to do. And then he got to something that I was expecting, which is to say that apparently the Department of Justice doesn't think that it has a role of looking into these fraud claims. So I said, that has to be the campaign that raises that with the state. The department doesn't take side in elections, and the department is not an extension of your legal team. And our role is to investigate fraud, and we'll look at something if it's specific, credible, and could have affected the outcome of the election. And we're doing that, and it's just not. They're just not meritorious. They're not panning out. And as I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran
what a summit.
Ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me, and leaving the office, and caught up with me and said that he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it.
What is acceptance of reality?
His Attorney General told him his claims of election fraud were false. President Trump continued to promote these claims.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Bill Barr has covered up
things
more shit
continued
than
to deteriorate between the 23rd and the weekend of the 29th. And then on November 29th, he appeared on Maria Bartiromo's show, Sunday Futures, I believe it was.
Right on.
And he said that the department was missing in action.
Well, no, we had glitches where they moved thousands of votes from my account to Biden's account. And these are glitches. So they're not glitches, they're theft. They're fraud, absolute fraud. This election was over, and then they did dumps. They call them dumps, big, massive dumps. In Michigan and Pennsylvania,
I'm a guy who
and all
there's a
over.
straight line.
How the FBI and Department of Justice, I don't know, maybe they're involved. But how
Maybe
people are
they're
allowed to get
involved.
away from this stuff with this stuff is unbelievable.
Yeah, his own administration.
Now, spurred by what he saw, Barr told the Associated Press on December 1st that there was no evidence of election fraud. And immediately after, Attorney General Barr's statement went public. Mr. Trump berated and he nearly fired Barr. But Barr persisted in telling the president that there was no evidence to support the fraud claims.
This got under my skin, but I also felt it was time for me to say something. So I set up a lunch with the AP reporter, Mike Balsamo, and I told him at lunch, I made this statement that to date we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. I had a later meeting scheduled at the White House at 3 o'clock with Meadows. This was previously scheduled, so I knew this was going to come up, and I went over there and I told my secretary that I thought I would probably be fired and told not to go home. I mean, not to go back to my office. So I said, you might have to pack up for me. And so when I got over there, I met with the chief of staff. He said the president was angry. He didn't really get into the issue of the fraud. And then I went up to Pat Cipolloni's office and we were talking with each other. And the word came down that he wanted us both to go to the Oval. And the president was as mad as I've ever seen him, and he was trying to control himself.
Wow.
The president said, well, this is killing me. You didn't have to say this. You must have said this because you hate Trump. You hate Trump. And then he raised the big vote dump, as he called it, in Detroit. And that, he said people saw boxes coming into the counting station at all hours of the morning and so forth. And I explained to him that at that point, I knew the exact number of precincts in Detroit. I think it was 630 something. I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit. And unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process. So they're not counted in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations. And so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours. So there's nothing. And I said, did anyone point out to you, did all the people complaining about it point out to you, you actually did better in Detroit than you did last time? I mean, there's no indication of fraud in Detroit. And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. And,
he likes that word.
Indignant about that.
So does Trump.
And I reiterated that they'd wasted a whole month on these claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. And I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations, disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
Okay, so the very next day, the president released a video rehashing some of the very same claims that his chief law enforcement officer had told him were, quote, nonsense.
Here's an example. This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm.
We were winning by a lot.
Again, Jesus.
That batch was received in Hara. We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial,
Why are they suing him?
or the change of a
I know.
chip, you can press a button for Trump, and the vote goes to Biden. What
Love the
kind of a
third person
system is
thing.
this?
I think I'm suffering PTSD.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Never
Or
ends.
some
Again
shitstorm
told the
dystopia.
president that there was nothing to these claims on December 14th.
When I walked in, sat down, he went off on a monologue saying that there was now definitive evidence involving fraud through the Dominion machines. And a report had been prepared by a very reputable cybersecurity firm, which he identified as Allied Security Operations Group. And he held up the report, and then he asked that a copy of it be made for me. And while a copy was being made, he said, this is absolute proof that the Dominion machines were rigged. The report means that I'm going to have a second term. And then he gave me a copy of the report. And as he talked more and more about it, I sat there flipping through the report and looking through it. And to be frank, it looked very amateurish to me. Didn't have the credentials of the people involved, but I didn't see any real qualifications. And the statements were made very conclusory, like, these machines were designed to, engage in fraud or something to that effect, but I didn't see any supporting information for it. And I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality.
Wow.
If he really believes this stuff. On the other hand, when I went into
Not give him that much credit, though.
would
Far short
tell
of
him how
hurt
crazy
strong
some of
feelings
these
that he saved for his
allegations
book,
were.
huh?
It was never
Isn't that fascinating?
indication of
He's out trumping Trump here.
interest
Portrait and courage.
in what the actual facts were.
Cults of
My opinion
selfishness will always
then, and
turn
my
on each
opinion
other.
now is that
incredible.
The election was not stolen by fraud.
They are methodically
I
proving
haven't
that
seen
Trump
anything
knew he was
since the
lying.
election that changes my mind on that, including the 2000 Mules movie.
Well, maybe you can assess that 2,000 mules, and people are talking about that.
Oh, here we go.
Well, I mean,
Oh my
just in a
God.
nutshell, I just think that the GBI was unimpressed with it. And I was similarly unimpressed with it because I think I was holding my fire on that to see what the photographic evidence was, because I thought, well, hell, if they have a lot of photographs of the same person dumping a lot of ballots in different boxes, that's hard to explain. So I wanted to see what the photographic evidence was, but the cell phone data is singularly unimpressive. I mean, it basically, if you take 2 million cell phones and figure out where they are physically in a big city like Atlanta or wherever, just by definition, you're going to find many hundreds of them have passed by and spent time in the vicinity of these boxes. And the premise that, if you go by a box, 5 boxes or whatever it was, that's a mule is just indefensible. It by definition, you're going to have hundreds of this. I mean, I saw one contractor said, we figured out that our truck alone would account for 6 cell phone signals. This was some kind of contractor, and our route would take us by these things on a regular basis. So but then when the movie came out, I think the photographic evidence in it was completely I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it was lacking. It didn't establish widespread illegal harvesting. The other thing is people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes and then figure out what votes were harvested and throw them out. It's still the burden on the challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast. Votes were the result of undue influence or bribes, or there was really, the person was non-compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway. I felt that before the election, it was possible to talk sense to the president And while you sometimes had to engage in, a big wrestling match with him, that it was possible to keep things on track. But I felt that after the election, he didn't seem to be listening, and I didn't think it was, that I was inclined not to stay around if he wasn't listening to advice from me or his other cabinet secretaries.
So on December 14th, Barr quit. Now, the Attorney General wasn't
write
the
a
only
book.
person who told the president that his claims were false. Other officials and close advisors told him the same thing.
Rather than try to address a counterfactual or a hypothetical, let me just say, there were instances where the president would say, people are telling me this, or I've heard this, or I saw on television, this impropriety in Atlanta or Pennsylvania or something. And we were in a position to say, our people have already looked at that, and we know that you're getting bad information. That's not correct. It demonstrated to be incorrect from our point of view. Have been debunked.
A month and a half or so after the election day, and at that meeting, various allegations of fraud were discussed, and Eric and Pat didn't, told the group, the president included, that none of those allegations had been substantiated to the point where they could be the basis for any litigation challenge to the election.
President Trump's own vice president and his top advisors also knew that there wasn't evidence to support the claims that the president was making.
Anyone else other than Mr. Meadows who asked you about the status outside of your legal group, Mr. Morgan and the others you mentioned, anyone else who asked you the status of what you were finding in your assessment of it?
Yes, sir.
Who's that?
Peter Navarro.
When did you talk to Mr. Navarro?
Mid-November.
Really?
Around the same time as Mr. Meadows?
Yes, sir.
And tell me about that conversation.
I recall him asking me questions about Dominion and maybe some other categories of allegations of voter fraud. And I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations because I thought the hand recount in Georgia would resolve any issues with a technology problem and with Dominion or Dominion flipping votes. And I mentioned at that time that the CISA, Chris Krebs, had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president. And I never took another phone call from Mr. Navarro.
Anyone
Wise
else besides
decision.
Mr. Meadows, Mr. Navarro, Mr. Person that you had discussions with, inquiring about what you were finding in your review of the allegations that were pouring in?
I believe I had about a 15-second conversation with the vice president about it as well.
When was that?
During one of the visits to the White House. I don't know which one. I think it was the first one in November. I had met him briefly at the campaign, and he remembered me and saw me. And he asked what I was doing on the campaign, and I told him that, we were looking into some of the issues related to voter fraud. And he asked me, I don't remember his exact words, but he asked me if we were finding anything. And I said that I didn't believe we were finding it, or I was not personally finding anything sufficient to alter the results of the election. And he thanked me. That was our interaction.
At a later hearing, you'll hear live testimony from the former acting Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice, Rich Donahue. But now I'd like to play a portion of his testimony.
I tried to, again, put this in perspective and to try to put it in very clear terms to the president. And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed. We've looked at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. We're doing our job. Much of the info you're getting is false. And then I went into, for instance, this thing from Michigan, this report about 68% error rate. Reality is it was only 0.0063% error rate, less than 1 in 15,000. So the president accepted that. He said, okay, fine, but what about the others? And again, this gets back to the point that there were so many of these allegations that when you gave him a very direct answer on one of them, he wouldn't fight us on it, but he would move to another allegation. So then I talked about a little bit about the Pennsylvania truck driver. This is another allegation that had come up. And this claim was by a truck driver.
We'll leave this here to meet our 40-year commitment to congressional coverage. The January 6th committee hearing continues live on C-SPAN 2. You can also watch online at cspan.org or on our free mobile video app, C-SPAN Now.
Producer, can we watch the
C-SPAN's taking a break to promote C-SPAN. Can we change the channel, Mary?
Yeah.
I hope we can. What?
C-SPAN's been taken over by the deep state.
That's right. I'm hanging up the phone. I'm never going to answer his call again.
That is total insanity. It's been an hour and 15 minutes. Oh wow! All right,
There's a YouTube link. Hold on, I'll send it over.
If we have a break, I'd like to bring up a point if everybody's interested.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And I said,
I want to jump in. It's also
no suitcase. You can watch that video over and over. There is no suitcase. There is a wheeled bin where they carry the ballots.
Yeah.
And that's just how they move ballots around that facility. There's nothing suspicious about that at all.
Remember the pallets of money in Iran that he kept
there was
talking
no
about?
multiple scanning of the ballots. One part of that allegation was that they were taking one ballot and scanning it through 3 or 4 or 5 times to rack up votes, presumably for Vice President Biden. I told him that the video did not support that. Then he went off on double voting. At the top of the next page, he said, dead people are voting. Indians are getting paid to vote. He meant people on Native American reservations. He said there's lots of fraud going on here. Told him flat out that much of the information he's getting is false and or just not supported by the evidence. We look at the allegations, but they don't pan out.
The office of the president has access to the most exquisite information on the planet at any given moment.
Ones who determined
And
that the
he's
president's
going to court
allegations regarding Dominion voting machines were false. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record of this hearing reports issued by the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, that addressed and rejected the claims of manipulation of voting machines in the 2020 election.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also ask unanimous consent to include in the record a report prepared by the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee that disproved claims of election fraud in Michigan, as well as a statement by 59 of the country's leading election security scientists, noting the absence of any credible evidence that the 2020 election had been altered through technical compromise, and 5 other reports from organizations and individuals confirming there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election or describing the spread of the former president's lies.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Damn.
Pursuant to the order of the committee for today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Okay.
Wow.
Heavy stuff.
There's so
So
much. I just want to say before the first one, I was so nervous. I'm not nervous anymore. I want to get everybody's like first impressions, and then let's open up the conversation about some specific stuff that was going on. But Dahlia, since you just joined us last, what do you think?
I mean, I'm just so obsessed. Mary, this is your lane, not mine. But just, the growing sense that the president just believed his own bullshit and surrounded himself with people who reinforced his bullshit. And man, I'm now using bullshit because Bill Barr thinks it's cool. I just think it's really fascinating that the sort of like substance of the defense here is everybody lied to him for transactional reasons for 4 years, because as Bill Barr said, sometimes you could get what you want. And they just kept lying to him or, fluffing him or doing whatever they were doing to get what they wanted. And this is turning into this ridiculous referendum on whether he had the requisite intent to actually defraud the country or whether he didn't. And it doesn't matter because he was surrounded with Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, who were willing to help.
Exactly. First of all, hi, Norm. We're just getting everybody's quick takes on this. I just want to say very quickly that, yeah, they lied to him because he required that they lied to him. John, what are you thinking?
So much to get to. I agree with you, Mary. I mean, methodically proving over and over again that they knew he was lying, and they all knew, they all did nothing about it. I think this is showing there's people that are even more guilty than Trump. I mean, it all comes down to, was Trump truly divorced from reality so he could credibly claim he wasn't lying? But if that's the case, why was the 25th Amendment not considered? I thought it was fascinating to see Stepien and McCarthy trying to teach this man on mail-in voting and how important it was, but Trump had already made up his mind. Hearing from Bill Barr, I mean, I can't get over. This is the same Bill Barr who completely distorted the Mueller report to protect Trump. It was the most cynical thing I've seen so far. A man who covered up so many crimes for Donald Trump, and now he's acting like he's John Dean. If
Right.
John Dean was a complete weasel who waited 17 months and a book release to do the right thing.
Precisely. And I'm hoping that we're dealing with the administration mostly. I cannot wait until they implicate all of the fucking congressional Republicans. Brian, what's your quick take?
Too quick. John's right. But I'll say that what Bill Barr proved was that he's a better Trump than Donald Trump. He was willing to sell himself. He'll aid and abet in the crime, but he's not going to commit the murder himself. He's going to step back and advocate for you until the point where he becomes personally involved, and then he's out. So that's the
There you
criminal
go.
side of Bill Barr, the little shit. And then the other part, I think we all miss a point here. Donald Trump right now, we've just seen who the next Michael Cohen is. We've just seen who the next Patsy's going to be. We've seen who is going under the bus next in the name of Donald Trump. Donald Trump isn't going to change. Donald Trump is Donald Trump. But this evidence today gave him ample coverage to throw Rudy Giuliani under the bus and say, look, I just took his advice. He got rid of the mob. It's not my fault.
That's it. We're waiting for Trump and Giuliani to turn on each other because it's not a ball
I
game.
think that's coming, baby.
It's not going to work out well for either one of them.
No.
And Mark
Stephanie-
Meadows and
Yes.
Mark Meadows,
And
who
Mark
I think
Meadows.
And
is
Mark Meadows.
implicated with every passing second
Weakest
here.
man ever.
Kevin McCarthy too. Stephanie, your quick take.
Okay, my quick take is I keep coming back to the importance of narrative and how that is the core of who Donald is and everyone around him, and understanding that and his sort of fusion with the right-wing media sphere is relying on that. We had that quote, all elements of the plot relied on conning the supporters, on this lie succeeding. And so that was where that's when all the effort shifted to, we got to con everybody. And that con, as they set up in the very beginning, led people to actually commit a violent act against our Capitol, and they're in prison now because of this very intentional lie. They keep using the word lie. We know we call it the big lie, but now it's being introduced of it was a con.
Yeah.
And every single part of the plot needed this narrative,
Yeah,
needed this lie.
And as all of you have pointed to, this would have gone nowhere if everybody en masse had just stood up and said, No, it's over. Norm, your quick take.
Well, first, I think they're just doing a brilliant job using the clips just beautifully. I think Zoe's done a terrific job of setting it up. The evidence is overwhelming. And while it's true that there's a real difference if you know that you're lying or you're deluding yourself, that is not an excuse from a prosecution. Imagine somebody shoots his wife because he believed that she had stolen money from him, and that large numbers of people, including the bank, point out that the money is in the account. That doesn't mean he's not going to be prosecuted for murder. So Trump is guilty either way. It just becomes even more of a sham if it turns out that he knew full well. And I think he knew full well. And this fits his modus operandi going back to 2016, not even the general election, into saying that Ted Cruz stole the Iowa caucuses. So I think this is just piling up evidence over and over again. One thing on Bill Barr, I just keep thinking of Lady Macbeth, out, damn spot. All of these people are trying to cleanse themselves.
Yeah.
Bill Barr's spots will not go away. He is an evil man. He was in his first tour as Attorney General. He was in his second. And I sure hope the networks don't keep putting him on. And maybe CBS, after hiring the vile Mick Mulvaney, will at least not hire Bill Barr as a legal expert.
Thank you. I
Don't hold back, Norm. Tell us what you really think, baby.
I hate to keep bringing up Iran-Contra, but what ultimately saved Reagan's legacy was the concept of plausible deniability.
Absolutely.
In that case, the implied notion that the president was so mentally diminished after the assassination attempt, he couldn't remember arming an enemy nation that had blown up our Marines in Beirut. He couldn't remember illegally arming both sides of the Iran-Iraq war. Bill Barr is someone who's covered up more shit than cat litter. And the question here is going to be, was Donald Trump too mentally incapacitated in his own charming fashion? I mean, we're hearing from Barr what all the Republicans were saying in private. Trump was a dangerous, incompetent being. It's obvious that the 25th Amendment should have been invoked if he wasn't lying. But what we've got so far today is Trump was told repeatedly, all the way months, by his campaign manager, all of his lawyers, and by his attorney general, by his Homeland Security chief, that the election was not stolen. Imagine if on the day Barry Goldwater and GOP leadership visited Nixon to tell him it was time to go, Nixon chose to listen to the My Pillow guy.
That's right. And I
was
think
the My Pillow guy.
Right. Kurt, hi. We're just getting everybody's quick take. So what's yours?
I think that this has been, the smoking gun of the big lie, the complete deconstruction from the minute that the returns came in. Donald Trump was informed that he lost the election, and he was informed by the people closest to him. I remember during the first impeachment proceedings, the big Republican line was, well, there's no firsthand witnesses. This is all third-hand testimony. Well, here it is, directly from the horse's mouth, directly from Bill Barr, who, as we've talked, he's not a good guy, folks. Like, this is a bad dude, okay? And even he was very straightforward in saying, you didn't win the election and everything you're saying is bullshit. Trump knew what he was doing. He knew he was lying. And if he didn't know, then he's out of his goddamn mind. I mean,
it could be both. It could be both.
It is both. This is really important.
That's going to be his out.
For all of us to remember, though.
That will be his out. But
it isn't an out.
Mary, it's not an out. Go, Mary.
It's not an out because this is all because Donald can't lose, because losing is a fatal thing, right? So he knows he lost, but he immediately needs to bury that understanding. And over time, he becomes more and more convinced. But he does know. Donald is the only person who can gaslight himself. So it is possible simultaneously to believe something and deny it with every fiber of your being. And you can kind of see the evolution of that. You can tell when he's lying, and you can tell that when he's convinced he's not. And that we've seen that evolution over time. It doesn't matter, though. Either he's guilty or he's not guilty by reason of insanity. And good luck proving that, because Bill Barr is not coming to Donald's rescue, like he did with Reagan.
Correct.
These people are saying very explicitly, he knew. And as Brian knows as well or better than anybody, he was already setting it up in September. You can't pretend to believe the election was stolen when 2 months prior to the election, you were saying that it's going to be rigged if I lose.
That's right. Well,
Can't have it
remember
both
too,
ways.
back in 2016, in October, when he thought he was going to lose to Hillary, he went out there and said, "Oh, there's all these illegal immigrants voting this election."
right.
He literally said the word rigged back in 2016 because Mary's right. The guy is so fragile. His ego it dominates everything that he does. The specter of him losing is something he can't possibly stomach and
It's
is
an
willing to
existential
So what does he do
threat.
next?
The thought of losing is an existential threat to him. So what people are explaining is it's not that he's refusing to accept what they're saying to him because he believes something else. It's he's trying to bend them to his will to do his building, to help him continue to seize power and hang on to power.
Agreed.
That's all it
There's a
is.
willful blindness jury instruction. Prosecutors can actually instruct a jury that just because the defendant refuses to see reality doesn't let him off the hook. And so I think it's really like the idea that he can just kind of do this, waves hands defense, and the people around him can do the waves hands defense. That's actually not a defense. You can be instructed around that.
And that's a really good point, Dahlia.
Sorry. I was just saying one thing that struck out to me during Bill Stepien's deposition that was played was the first mention of Kevin McCarthy directly and a meeting that he had directly with McCarthy. That explains why the committee wanted to talk to him in the first place. It explains that Kevin did have firsthand knowledge in real time about the plot that was unfolding to delegitimize the election. And so that was a little nugget that stood out to me.
Yeah, I will tell you, I've been around Congress for more than 50 years. I've never seen anybody as vile as Kevin McCarthy.
Well, Mitch McConnell gives a run for his
leader
money.
as vile as Kevin McCarthy. I mean, there
In
are
the House,
the
yes,
Boberts
absolutely.
and the Greens and the and so many more like that.
Go back
And
to
Mitch,
the Clinton era.
McConnell in the Senate. It's like it's a matching pair. It's quite
makes you
it's
long
quite
for the
impressive.
dignity of a John Boehner,
At least with
doesn't it?
McConnell operates from extreme competency, I'll say, having worked in the Senate back in the day. McCarthy's a moron. I mean, like I'm telling you, he's not a bright guy.
I don't agree with you on McConnell. I've known him since 1978. He's merely conniving. He's Donald Trump with political savvy. I respect, but you're right about the other guy. He's a complete moron.
Can we agree that becoming Speaker of the House would be the worst thing to ever happen to Kevin McCarthy in his life?
It would be. It would be. And I think that what I'm hoping and what I think they're laying out is that they will really start focusing on congressional Republicans. One thing, and I guess it isn't that important, but it continues to mystify me that anybody believes anything Donald says ever. It's just he's
I'm
so
amazed
clearly.
by that. I agree. I don't know
so
how.
frustrating, but again, he has a lot of enablers, but one of the brilliant things this committee's doing in their back is just using Republicans against Donald, and it's
second panel of witnesses.
Here we go.
We're joined today by B.J. Pack, Al Smith, and Ben Ginsberg.
Pack should be
Mr.
good.
Pack is a former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. Mr. Smith is a former city commissioner for the city of Philadelphia, where he served for more than 10 years. Mr. Ginsberg is one of the leading election law attorneys in the country and has represented Republican presidential candidates in election litigation dating back to 2000.
On top of you for a sec. I'll be right back.
He represented George W. Bush in the Bush v. Gore litigation. I will now swear in our witnesses. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the break, I think you all heard Mr. Barr and Mr. Donahue talk about the false claims that Mr. Trump and his supporters made about suitcases of fake ballots in Georgia. We have a witness here today who thoroughly investigated that issue. Mr. Pack, I want to thank you for appearing before us today. You were appointed by President Trump to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, and you served from 2017 until January of 2021. You were the lead federal prosecutor there and worked for the Department of Justice under then Attorney General Bill Barr. Now, were you ever asked by Attorney General Barr to investigate claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election? And if so, what were those claims?
Thank you, Congressman Lofgren. Thank you for the question. Approximately December 4th, I believe, of 2020, Attorney General Barr and I had a conversation about an unrelated case, the case at issue. At the end of the conversation, Mr. Barr had asked me if I had seen a certain videotape that was being reported in the news where Mr. Giuliani, in a Senate subcommittee hearing that was held the day before, May 3rd, showed a videotape of a purportedly a security tape at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, which is also in Fulton County in the city of Atlanta. City of, yes. At the time, Mr. Barr asked me that he had made a public statement that he had not seen any widespread election fraud that would question the outcome of the election. And because of the videotape and the serious allegation that Mr. Giuliani was making with respect to the suitcase full of ballots purported in the video, he asked me to find out what I could about it, because he had envisioned that in some days after our call that he was going to go to the White House for a meeting, and then that issue might come up. He asked me to make it a priority to get to the bottom of, to try to substantiate the allegation made by Mr. Giuliani.
Thank you. I understand the Georgia Secretary of State's office investigated those State Farm Arena allegations and didn't find any evidence of fraud. What did you find when your office conducted its own investigation?
We found that the suitcase full of ballots, the alleged black suitcase that was being seen pulled from under the table, was actually an official lockbox where ballots were kept safe. We found out that there was a mistake in terms of a misunderstanding that they were done counting ballots or tallying ballots for the night. And the partisan watchers that was assigned by each of the respective parties were announced to send home. But once they realized the mistake, someone from the Secretary of State's office had indicated that, no, we're not done for the night. You need to go ahead and continue counting. So once they packed up the lockbox full of ballots, they brought back the official ballot box again and continue to tally the ballots from the lockbox. Unfortunately, during the Senate hearing, Mr. Giuliani only played a clip that showed them pulling out the official ballot box from under the table and referring to that as a smoking gun of a fraud in Fulton County. But in actuality, in review of the entire video, it showed that that was actually an official ballot box that was kept underneath the tables. And then we saw them pack up because the announcement that they thought they were done for the night. And then once the announcement was made that you should continue counting, they brought the ballot box out and they continued to count. The FBI interviewed the individuals that are depicted in the videos, that purportedly were double, triple counting of the ballots, and determined that nothing irregular happened in the counting, and the allegations made by Mr. Giuliani were false.
Thank you very much. I'd like to play again a testimony from Mr. Donahue, who appeared before the committee before today.
Mr. Donahue, we talked at some length about whether or not the White House or the president was informed about the Antrim report. On the result of the investigations, the interviews that have gone on Fulton County, how would those results have been communicated to the White House, to the president?
I don't know how they were initially communicated. I do know that they came up in subsequent conversations with the president, and Dag Rose and I essentially told him, we looked into that and it's just not true.
Okay, so he was informed.
I told the president myself that several times in several conversations, that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at the video, we interviewed the witnesses, it was not true.
Mr. Pack, after you left the U.S. Attorney's Office on January 4th, 2021, did the next U.S. Attorney there, I think Mr. Trump's personal pick, Bobby Christine, did he investigate any remaining claims of fraud? And if so, did he find any evidence that supported the president's claims of voter fraud?
It is my understanding that Mr. Christine continued any investigations that were pending at the time of my departure, but he was unable to find any evidence of fraud that affected the outcome of the election.
So after investigating the president's and Mr. Giuliani's claims about voter fraud in Georgia, is it your view today that there was no evidence of widespread fraud sufficient to undermine confidence in the outcome of the election in Georgia?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Pack. And I want to thank you also for the service that you've given to our country. We appreciate that. Next, I'd like to turn to President Trump's false allegations about election integrity in Philadelphia. The Attorney General discussed these allegations at some length.
You know, the idea, the president has repeatedly suggested that there was some kind of outpouring of unexpected votes in inner city areas like Philadelphia as recently as January 13th when he walked off the NPR set. He was asked by the interviewer, what's your evidence of fraud? And he said more people voted in Philadelphia than there were voters. And that was absolute rubbish. The turnout in Philadelphia was in line with the state's turnout. And in fact, it was not as impressive as many suburban counties. And there was nothing strange about the Philadelphia turnout. It wasn't like there was all these unexpected votes that came out in Philadelphia. So, you know, I think once you actually look at the votes and then there's an obvious explanation. For example, in Pennsylvania, Trump ran weaker than the Republican ticket generally. He ran weaker than two of the state candidates. He ran weaker than the congressional delegation running for federal Congress, and he ran weaker than the Republican, I think. I haven't looked at this recently, but he generally was a weak element on the Republican ticket. So that does not suggest that the election was stolen by fraud.
How about Pennsylvania and Bill McSwain? We were talking to the U.S. Attorney in Philadelphia about an alleged discrepancy between the number of absentee ballots issued and the number of ballots cast.
Right. So that was one of the big ones for a period of time. I think that was raised at Gettysburg by Giuliani or something like that, but it kept on being repeated, and I found it annoying because it didn't seem that it was right. So I called McSwain, and he got back to me. He said, no, the problem is that Mastriano threw out this number, and what he did was he mixed apples and oranges. He took the number of applications for the Republican primary and he compared it to the number of absentee votes cast in the general election. But once you actually go and look and compare apples to apples, there's no discrepancy at all. And that's one of the, I think at some point I covered that with the president.
We have another witness here today who has detailed knowledge about the election process in Philadelphia. Mr. Schmidt, at the time of the 2020 presidential election, You were serving as the only Republican member of Philadelphia's 3-member city commission, which is responsible for overseeing elections throughout the city. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congressperson.
So President Trump made numerous claims regarding fraudulent voting practices in Philadelphia, including the claim that dead people were voting. In fact, Mr. Giuliani told Pennsylvania state legislators that 8,000 dead people voted in Pennsylvania. You investigated those claims of voter fraud. Can you tell us what you found?
Not only was there not evidence of 8,000 dead voters voting in Pennsylvania, there wasn't evidence of 8. We took seriously every case that was referred to us, no matter how fantastical, no matter how absurd, and took every one of those seriously, including these.
As it turns out, even Mr. Trump's campaign lawyers knew that the dead voter claims weren't valid.
I guess the crooks in Philadelphia are disappointed in this. They only submitted 8,021 ballots from dead people, mail-in ballots for dead people. Probably easier for dead people to submit mail-in ballots than it is to vote in person.
Rudy was at this stage of his life and the same ability to manage things at this level or not. And obviously, I think Bernie Kerik publicly said it. They never proved the allegations that they were making.
They're throwing him under the bus. I'm telling you, he's an ex-Cohen.
Mr. Schmidt, on November 11th, 2020, President Trump tweeted about you saying, and here's a quote, "A guy named Al Schmidt, a Philadelphia commissioner and so-called Republican or rhino, is being used big time by the fake news media to explain how honest things were with respect to the election in Philadelphia. He refuses to look at a mountain of corruption, dishonesty. We win." As a result of that tweet and the CNN interview you gave where you stated the dead voter claims in Pennsylvania were false, you and your staff were subjected to disturbing threats. Can you tell us about that?
The threats prior to that tweet, and on some level, it feels almost silly to talk about a tweet, but we can really see the impact that they have, because prior to that, the threats were pretty general in nature. Corrupt election officials in Philadelphia are going to get what's coming to them. You're what the Second Amendment is for. You're walking into the lion's den, all sorts of things like that.
Radicalized.
After the president tweeted at
Those are the
me by
trivial
name,
ones.
calling me out the way that he did.
The ones that don't threaten that you worry
the threats
about.
became much more specific, much more graphic, and included not just me by name, but included members of my family by name, their ages, our address, pictures of our home, just every bit of detail that you could imagine. That was what changed with that tweet.
The threats to election
Behind
workers
me
is such
are
an important part of
redacted
this going
threats
forward.
that you received.
That's Trump
that you provided
intimidation.
to the
Typical.
committee. Now we
is
redacted
pathetic.
portions of the text to protect your family. Mr. Schmidt, I think I speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are deeply sorry for what you and your loved ones have been through. And I also want to thank you for your service to your country and for standing up for the rule of law. I want to thank both Mr. Pack and Mr. Schmidt for their service, their testimony, and for standing up for the rule of law. Now I'd like to turn to another subject. The courts in our country provide a legitimate venue for campaigns to challenge what they view as irregular election practices. Now, courts have the final say on how the law applies to those challenges. We have a renowned legal expert here to address the Trump campaign's activities in court. Mr. Ginsburg, you've spent your entire career representing Republicans in election-related
100% Republican
you
witness.
served as the National
All
Counsel on
Republicans.
Republican presidential campaigns
So
in 2000,
smart.
in 2004, and in
Again,
2012.
highlighting how Fox and the
You played a
GOP
key
screwed this
role
up.
in the 2000 Florida recount that led to the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore. You served
Oh,
as
I remember
the
him.
co-chair of the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. I think it's fair to say you're the most prominent Republican lawyer who's litigated in the election field. Now, you've analyzed the Trump campaign's litigation pretty carefully. What's the normal process for post-election litigation? How is the Trump campaign's different?
Good question.
Did we lose her?
We're frozen.
From the kinds of post-election litigation you've been involved in and know about?
In the normal course of things, any campaign on the night of the election and the days after will do a couple of different things. One is that they'll analyze precinct results to look for abnormalities in the results, and they'll send people to those precincts to ask more questions. Secondly, all campaigns will have poll watchers and poll workers and observers in the polling place. And so campaigns will talk to those people if they saw any irregularities that could cause problems in the election. Now, the Trump campaign talked pre-election about having 50,000 poll workers. So presumably, they did have eyes on the ground in all these places. And so in the normal course of things, a campaign will analyze the reports that come in. Trump campaign had a couple of basic problems, however. Number one, the 2020 election was not close. In 2000, that was 537 and close. In this election, the most narrow margin was 10,000 and something in Arizona, and you just don't make up those sorts of numbers in recounts. And when the claims of fraud and irregularities were made, you've heard very compelling testimony from Mr. Stepien, from Matt Morgan, from Alex Cannon about those claims and how they didn't believe them. And so that put the Trump campaign on sort of a process of bringing cases without the actual evidence that you have to have in which the process is designed to bring out.
So are you aware of any instance in which a court found the Trump campaign's fraud claims to be credible?
No, there was never that instance. In all the cases that were brought, and I've looked at the more than 60 that include more than 180 counts. And no, the simple fact is that the Trump campaign did not make its case.
The Select Committee has identified 62 post-election lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and his allies between November 4th, 2020 and January 6th, 2021. Those cases resulted in 61 losses and only a single victory, which actually didn't affect the outcome for either candidate. Despite those 61 losses, President Trump and his allies claim that the courts refused to hear them out, and as a result, they never had their day in court. Mr. Ginsburg, what do you say about the claims that Mr. Trump wasn't given an opportunity to provide the evidence they had of voter fraud? Did they have their day in court?
They did have their day in court. About half of those cases that you mentioned were dismissed at the procedural stage for a lack of standing. The proper people didn't bring the case, or there wasn't sufficient evidence and it got dismissed on a motion to dismiss. But in the other, there was discussion of the merits that was contained in the complaints. And in no instance did a court find that the charges of fraud were real. And it's also worth noting that even if the Trump campaign complained that it did not have its day in court, there have been post-election reviews in each of the 6 battleground states that could have made a difference. And those ranged from the somewhat farcical Cyber Ninjas case in Arizona to the Michigan Senate report that was mentioned earlier, the hand recount in Georgia that Mr. Pack addressed. And in each one of those instances, there was no credible evidence of fraud produced by the Trump campaign or his supporters.
Thank you. As Mr. Ginsburg has explained, there are no cases where the Trump campaign was able to convince a court that there was widespread fraud or irregularities in the 2020 election. Over and over, judges appointed by Democrats and Republicans alike directly refuted this false narrative. They called out the Trump campaign's lack of evidence for its claims, and the judges did that even in cases where they could have simply thrown out the lawsuit without writing a word. You can see behind me a few excerpts from the decisions in these 62 cases. The Trump campaign's lack of evidence was criticized by judges across the political spectrum. In Pennsylvania, a Trump-appointed judge concluded, quote, "Charges require specific allegations and proof. We have neither here." Another Trump-appointed judge warned that if cases like these succeeded, quote, "Any disappointed loser in a presidential election able to hire a team of clever lawyers could flag claim deviations from election results and cast doubt on election results." The list goes on and on. Allegations are called, quote, "an amalgamation of theories, conjecture, and speculation." In another, strained legal arguments without merit, unsupported by evidence, derived from wholly unreliable sources, a fundamental and obvious misreading of the Constitution. The rejection of President Trump's litigation efforts was overwhelming. 22 federal judges appointed by Republican presidents, including 10 appointed by President Trump himself, and at least 24 elected or appointed Republican state judges dismissed the president's claims. At least 11 lawyers have been referred for disciplinary proceedings due to bad faith and baseless efforts to undermine the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Rudy Giuliani had his license to practice law suspended in New York. And just this week, a newly filed complaint will potentially make his suspension from practicing law in DC permanent. And as we've just heard from perhaps the most preeminent Republican election lawyer in recent history, the Trump campaign's unprecedented effort to overturn its election laws in court was a deeply damaging abuse of the judicial process. As stated by U.S. District Court Judge David Carter, this was, quote, "a coup in search of a legal theory."
Oof.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The second panel of witnesses is now dismissed.
All Republicans, all really solid.
Yeah.
Yep. Everyone. Smart strategy.
Kind of
And
wish they,
some judges.
Rudy Giuliani is so screwed. Rudy Giuliani is just so screwed. I
yeah,
know.
but he's not alone though. That's
No,
the good
but
news.
that's going to be the Donald. I mean, Giuliani's
Without
got no place
objection,
to
the chair
go.
recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for a closing statement.
The worse this gets, the more Hunter Biden tweets
Thank
we're
you,
going to have
Mr.
to deal with.
Chairman.
Yep.
Now that we
Got
understand
that
the
one.
litigation efforts by President Trump and his allies, I'd like to present additional actions taken by the Trump campaign during this time. President Trump continued to push the stolen election narrative, even though he and his allies knew that their litigation efforts, making the same claim, had failed. It's worth pointing out that litigation generally does not continue past the safe harbor date of December 14th. But the fact that this litigation went on, well, that decision makes more sense when you consider the Trump campaign's fundraising tactics. Because if the litigation had stopped on December 14th, there would have been no fight to defend the election and no clear path to continue to raise millions of dollars. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd ask for unanimous consent to include in the record a video presentation describing how President Trump used the lies he told to raise millions of dollars from the American people. These fundraising schemes were also part of the effort to disseminate the false claims of election fraud.
Without objection, so
My name is Amanda Wick, and I'm Senior Investigative Counsel with the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Between Election Day and January 6th, the Trump campaign sent millions of fundraising emails to Trump supporters, sometimes as many as 25 a day. The emails claimed the, quote, left-wing mob was undermining the election, implored supporters to, quote, step up to protect the integrity of the election, and encouraged them to, quote, fight back. But as the Select Committee has demonstrated, the Trump campaign knew these claims of voter fraud were false, yet they continued to barrage small dollar donors with emails, encouraging them to donate to something called the Official Election Defense Fund. The Select Committee discovered no such fund existed.
I don't believe there is actually a fund called the Election Defense Fund.
Is it fair to say that Election Defense Fund was another, I think we called it a marketing tactic? Yes.
Fraud,
And
perhaps?
Funds as marketing tactics.
Just a topic matter.
Fraud, period.
Potentially go to be, how money could potentially be.
He's dancing. He's dancing.
Claims that the election was stolen were so successful, President Trump and his allies raised $250 million, nearly $100 million in the first week after the election. On November 9th, 2020, President Trump created a separate entity called the Save America PAC. Most of the money raised went to this newly created PAC, not to election-related litigation. The Select Committee discovered that the Save America PAC made millions of dollars of contributions to pro-Trump organizations, including $1 million to Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows' charitable foundation, $1 million to the America First Policy Institute, a conservative organization which employs several former Trump administration officials, $204,857 to the Trump Hotel Collection, and over $5 million to Event Strategies, Inc., the company that ran President Trump's January 6th rally on the Ellipse.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing.
The evidence developed by the Select Committee highlights how the Trump campaign aggressively pushed false election claims to fundraise, telling supporters it would be used to fight voter fraud that did not exist. The emails continued through January 6th, even as President Trump spoke on the Ellipse. 30 minutes after the last fundraising email was sent, the Capitol was breached.
First footage of the day, by the way.
Yeah.
Every
Pretty
American
powerful.
is entitled and encouraged to participate in our electoral process. Political fundraising is part of that. Small dollar donors use scarce disposable income to support candidates and causes of their choosing, to make their voices heard. And those donors deserve the truth about what those funds will be used for. Throughout the committee's investigation, we found evidence that the Trump campaign and its surrogates misled donors as to where their funds would go and what they would be used
Misled
for.
the donors.
So not only was there the big lie,
Fraud.
there was the big ripoff. Donors deserve to know where their funds are really going. They deserve better than what President Trump and
Well,
his
that's what they
team
want to indict him on.
Mr. Chairman,
The
I
gift
yield
that
back.
keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all of our witnesses today. And I'd also like to, in particular, wish Mr. Stepien and his family all the best on the arrival of a new baby. Today's hearing, Mr. Chairman, was very narrowly focused. And in the coming days, you will see the committee move on to President Trump's broader planning for January 6th, including his plan to corrupt the Department of Justice and his detailed planning with lawyer John Eastman to pressure the vice president, state legislatures, state officials, and others to overturn the election. Let me leave you today with one clip to preview what you will see in one of our hearings to come. This is the
got the tease.
testimony of White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. John Eastman called Mr. Hirschman the day after January 6th, and here is how that conversation went.
I said to him, "Are you out of your effing mind?" I said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition.
Ouch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
At the conclusion of last week's hearing, we showed you a video of rioters explaining why they had come to Washington on January 6th. It was because Donald Trump told them to be here. Today, we heard about some of the lies Donald Trump embraced and amplified when it became clear he didn't have the numbers of votes to win the election. We heard about how officials at different levels of government explored claims of fraud and found no evidence. Yet the former president continued to repeat those false claims over and over again. Today, we'll end things where we did on Thursday, back on January 6th, hearing words of individuals who wanted to stop the transfer of power. We know they were there because of Donald Trump. Now we hear some of the things they believed. Without objection, I enter into the record a video presentation.
I know exactly what's going on right now. Fake election. They think they're gonna fucking cheat us out of our vote and put communist fucking Biden in office. It ain't fucking happening today, buddy. You voted?
Yes, sir.
How'd it go?
Voted early. It went well, except for the can't really trust the software. Dominion software all over.
We voted, and right in the top right-hand corner of the Dominion voting machine that we used, there was a Wi-Fi symbol with 5 bars. So that most definitely connected to the internet, without a doubt. So they stole that from us twice. We're not doing it anymore. We're not taking it anymore. So we're standing up, we're here, and whatever happens, we're not laying down again.
It didn't work. It absolutely worked. It didn't work. No. Trust the system. 200,000 people that weren't even registered voted. 430,000 votes disappeared from President Trump's tally. And you can't stand there and tell me that it worked.
I don't want to say that what we're doing is right. But if the election's being stolen, what is it going to take?
You know, all of his supporters share the same pigmental pallor.
Remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members.
Don't
from
want
the
a
room.
ruler.
Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Holy cow.
Great.
My goodness gracious. Let's start with this. I'm very proud right now of this committee and God knows how many thousands of people who contributed to the work. I'm relieved that people stepped up, even though it was probably at some risk to them, even though it's people we revile, like Bill Barr. But I gotta say, guys, my heart is still broken here that this happened, that we still don't know where this is going to go, and that so many people were lied to. So many people are still believing the lies, and so many people are probably just waiting to be activated to fight against, if there's justice, to fight against the conclusion that yes, indeed, Donald Trump and many of his enablers are guilty of sedition. They're traitors to this country. They've committed fraud, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think this could be going any better than it's going, but it's still hard to take.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel you, but Mary, you know better than anybody. I mean, you live through it. I mean, that's family. So you have a connection to that none of us can relate to. But sitting in that briefing room, I told you earlier on,
this was like PTSD for me. It brought back these
Yeah.
horrible feelings of every day thinking it can't get any worse, and every day it did. And yeah, it takes you back to a very itchy place. But some of the things that these people said, we all knew, but to hear it all condensed and brought out, and put on the record, so that future generations can see it, and so decisions can be made. Yeah, it goes back to them laying out a foundation for prosecution, but also putting its stamp on what they believe as someone wiser than I said about narrative. They're framing a narrative for the future.
Yeah, they are. And, one thing I want to see what you all think about is, I don't think the audience here is Merrick Garland. He's either doing his job or he's not doing his job. But clearly he's paying attention.
Yeah.
So, Norm, well, I just want everybody to give me your broad thoughts about what happened today, what we think is going to happen, and what the implications are, Norm.
So I thought it was brilliantly done today, just absolutely brilliantly done. And Zoe was terrific.
So good.
I've been trying to get Congress for many years to change the whole format of the way they do hearings.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing some templates here. You don't always need to have counsel lay it out. You can have smart members who do it. And this was just done brilliantly. I do think the Justice Department is paying attention, but we also know the Justice Department has a lot more evidence that the committee doesn't have. And one of the things I was thinking as this was going on is almost a year ago, they seized all of Rudy Giuliani's devices. That's in the possession of the executive branch. My guess is beyond his drunken advice. And I was saying earlier, we all watched Drunk History. Now we are seeing Drunk Coup in action.
Coup.
But beyond that,
crap, that's going to be the title of a movie, Norm. You just did it.
Beyond that, I will bet you that there are communications directly with Donald from Giuliani.
Yep.
Laying out sedition. And I just hope fervently that Rudy finds a prison where he can get the help.
I'm telling you, man, he's the next Michael Cohen. But Merritt, you're right. I wouldn't it's going to be Trump is going down in the end, but he'll throw anyone and everyone under the bus. And they've just set Rudy up to be the next Michael Cohen.
Well, he already threw Ivanka under the bus because, people think that, focus on the fact that he said she'd checked out. He accused her of perjury.
Yes.
So let's be real. Dahlia, what are your thoughts?
I've been saying all week, first of all, I'm also heartbroken. I'm finding it very hard to feel triumphal here because it's triggering and it's just painful, and it doesn't get better, seeing it the next time. But I've been trying to say that what worries me is that this isn't just the thing that happened on January 6th. This is a prologue for what's coming next.
Yeah.
And there's a million ways that we saw, a lot of the really scary stuff that we saw in last week's hearing is kind of a prologue for what's happening with state election boards, right? Is what's happening with voter suppression efforts. And I think it's really kind of rich to hear people talk about how there was not a scintilla of evidence of vote fraud. And yet, like my friends, 19 states have passed 34 vote suppression measures in 2021 alone. So if there's no such thing as vote fraud, and every single one of those cases ended in a loss, why are we moving forward making it harder to vote? And that's all lashed to these false claims of election fraud. And by the way, that didn't start with Donald Trump in 2020.
Right.
So I just want people to really, like when you asked, what is the audience here? You cannot come in as Bill Barr, who the summer before the election was saying that mail fraud was rampant and that if people were allowed to do mail-in voting, they were all going to cheat, and then hear him smugly say there was nothing wrong with this election. Pick a lane.
Yeah.
And if the lane is that every single claim of vote fraud was a joke, it was, Bill Barr's language, right? He's like, it's rubbish, it's bullshit, it's nonsense, it's laughable. That's the guy who was absolutely on board for there being massive election fraud to justify constraining the vote in 2020. So I just really want folks to look at the big picture. It's not just accountability for the actions of January 6th or even this administration. The party has been making claims about fraudulent voting that have let us constrict the vote, and the Supreme Court has absolutely birthed that and serviced that. And if we can't connect what I think is devastating testimony from Republicans that vote fraud is a joke, then we are really in peril of having this happen again. So I just think when we ask ourselves who the audience is, Mary, one of the audiences needs to be those of us who are sort of watching. So I just think the right to vote go away. Ask ourselves who the audience is, Mary. One of the audiences needs to be those of us who are sort of watching.
Okay, wait. So somebody's listening to this on some other device.
One of the audiences needs
because
to be.
I hear.
Yes.
Dahlia is still. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Dahlia, it's such a great point. This is in the last billion votes count, there have been like 31 documented, like 0.00000 or whatever. And in the handful of fraud cases in the last election, they were all Republicans voting twice for Donald. But it is also an important point that, yes, the committee does need to look back to see how long ago this started. We do need to look forward to what the implications are for the future of voting rights in America and democracy. John, what are your broad thoughts?
Well, I agree. One of the things I was looking forward to that I think they nailed better in the first installment of the hearings was that these hearings, I thought, were going to be even more about 2024 than they are about 2020, because it was referenced in the last time, but this is really, you're not going to change that many people's minds. This should be the time to warn us that this fraud is underway. You know, it's challenging for me as a comedian because I'm sitting here trying to write jokes the whole time for Sirius XM tonight.
Yeah.
You know, I'm pitching my new election security buddy show, BJ in the Bar. I'm trying to find anything funny in this, but it's heartbreaking. And what's most heartbreaking is that I don't know how much these ironclad facts are going to move the needle. I also felt that perhaps they should have swapped the running order today. I think they wanted to open with Bill Stepien, but I think it would have maybe served better if they had flipped them. It was sort of 3-act structure. Act 1 was there was no credible evidence of fraud produced by the Trump campaign. That's what the whole morning was about, the whole first part. That's what all the Bill Barr footage was about. By the time we got to the afternoon, we got to how there really was no fraud. You know, the whole first part was Trump knew he was lying. The second part was we looked into it. There was no fraud. I almost would have preferred to show the 3 Republican officials first, proving in their investigations there was no fraud.
Yeah.
Then in the second part, go to Bill Barr and all this footage of Trump clearly knowing he was lying. But I loved the capper of ending with the fact that there was no big lie. There was the big ripoff, that the official election defense fund defrauded the American people, that there really was some election fraud. And it was against the Trump supporters who should sue on grift and demand their donations back. A smart Democratic Party will make a real issue out of that.
Yeah, it's incredible how many tentacles there were, like how many different crimes were committed. And the committee really, if the committee can delve into all of that and make a case for all of that, I think that would be incredible.
I also just want to really quickly say it was very smart that every single witness today was a Republican. And we have to remember that it was just 3 weeks ago, Bill Barr said he would vote for this man again.
That's right.
Months after giving this testimony.
That's right. He sure did.
That's such a great point.
I
Stephanie, your
well, I
thoughts
wanted to
in
give
general?
like a quick. I had I'm getting a text from Allison Gilbert. It's like that was really good. Meadows got $1 million from the defrauded donors. That's what Bannon was indicted for. That's a crime.
That's why Meadows is suing this committee.
That's right.
Wire fraud. Yay.
So anyway, so in general, thanks, AG.
Thanks, AG.
Good point. But yeah, Stephanie, your general thoughts about the day.
Well, I thought, I look, they're going after the words, And there's a lot to be said for the power of words. Every single person, as I said, I might have said this on your show last time, that showed up on January 6th and participated in that insurrection, every Trump supporter that was there, got there beginning with words. They were radicalized on this lie. For folks that are in like a cult like that, or even if they're even wavering a little bit, they got swept up in something. Generally, those people need an off-ramp to get out of it, if there's any hope of that. And what was also happening today, not that this is the audience, but maybe if the facts can reach, or some of the testimony can reach those people, especially the ones that are in prison or facing prison, is there's an off-ramp for them to blame. They always need a blame. They need someone. It's never them. It's never going to be them, by the way. It will never be them ever, under any circumstances, that got themselves at whatever point in their life they have trauma or whatever. So they need a thing to get off of this. And this was the beginning of that thing of like, you were conned. Here's all the money that went, this was all a lie. He knew it was a lie. He calls Bill Barr in there, and he's going, okay, here's the Chinese menu of horseshit, right? That's my word, that I've got right now. What about this one, right? And Bill Barr's like, no, that's not. What about this one? This one, does this work for you? How are you going to help me out here? Roy Cohn, what any of these things coming out of 4chan and Breitbart and Rudy Giuliani's COVID fart, any of this working for you? Smoking a pancake, billing a bit. No, bonging a blitz. So that's all of that. He was just pressuring everybody to pick something that he could keep going on, because he needed people to show up that day. I think that's where this is heading and what we're going to see. I want to know the first time it got presented to Donald that, okay, here's what you can do with the lawsuits. We'll try this. Here's the propaganda. We'll try that. But there is this day, January 6th. There is this election certification thing. And if we can stop that, then we can kick things back. We've got our fake electors. Notice there was so much attention around Arizona. That's Kelly Ward running that GOP out of there. Everybody there in Arizona that is Team Donald is really Team Donald. They're Team QAnon Donald, right? Yep. So look at what's been happening in Arizona since, and all the corruption and all the propaganda around it all. Pennsylvania, look at how, get Mehmet Oz in there, get someone in there for me, right? Because then they can pick the AG and we could do this next time. So this is an ongoing threat, because they figured out the mechanics to make it real, because we saw everybody today that was showing up saying, this isn't real. We're not going along with this. So there's a playbook now to follow to make it real, to force it into reality, to have that Chinese menu work out. Dominion voting machines, okay, maybe that was too much, because they sued Fox. So that's the ongoing part of it. Right. But the January 6th part of it, those people and why they were there is because of the propaganda. They were repeating the words. Right. That's what got them there, actually moved them into a violent act. And words will get us out of this. They'll get us out of this, you guys. We have to. I'm so pleased with this panel and this committee, with how concise they were with their words, with how clear they were with their words, with how clear the narrative was that they were saying, how they kept bottom lining it and had all these great sound bites and takeaways that can persist in the media now, so that it doesn't leave the discourse.
Right. Which is why I think it absolutely matters. That Donald knew he was lying.
That's right.
Of course it matters. However, say for the sake of argument, he didn't know. People still believed him, and he still incited violence against the Capitol. So that's something that we cannot lose sight of. Jen, where are you going? You're muted. Just want to, first of all, welcome back.
I'm still here.
And secondly, I just want to get your general thoughts about the day, and then I have a couple of other points I want to talk to you guys about.
Well, I was feeling really good until I heard Dahlia, so I'm going to put that. Thanks, honey. So I'm going to put that in, but it's good. She always keeps us focusing on the real threat, but I'm just going to focus on the hearing right now. And I guess I was very happy on two fronts. One, the follow the money piece that Allison just brought up via Stephanie is so critical. And there were hints at this idea of wire fraud many months ago. And I just love, whether it's tax fraud or wire fraud, those kinds of cases always excite me as a way to, bring these criminal cases. I mean, the idea that it's members of the Trump campaign and maybe Trump himself who might face wire fraud charges is fantastic. Related to using the lie in order to raise funds. But the other big thing is during the break, I heard Joyce Vance, Mary, talking about this idea of willful blindness. And
Dahlia talked about that too.
Oh, well, I think, I was pulling my book off the shelf because I write a bit about the instruction, but it's actually a jury instruction that was used in the Enron case. And I'd like to read it to you because words matter. Here's the instruction. And again, it's important because we have Bill Barr and many other people saying, we told Donald this was horseshit, but he just didn't want to hear it. So here's what we say. You may find that a defendant had knowledge of a fact if you find that the defendant deliberately closed his eyes to what would otherwise have been obvious to him. While knowledge on the part of the defendant cannot be established merely by demonstrating that the defendant was negligent, careless, or foolish, knowledge can be inferred if the defendant deliberately blinded himself to the existence of a fact.
That's right.
It's also known as a deliberate ignorance or the deliberate indifference instruction.
Yeah, I think it matters to some degree, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter.
But it matters to Bill Barr, right? And I'm sorry, got it the wrong guy. Damn it, Merrick Garland.
Yes, of course. But
it matters.
And write a piece on this.
Yes,
you should really get that out there for a larger audience.
Yeah.
Okay, Norm. Thanks.
Because
you're my assigning editor. Okay, I will. You're right.
So there are three things that start a lot, but I'm going to narrow it down to three. So one is just the ongoing, just the brazenness of the mendacity. Like these people have known all along that they were lying. They're lying now. It is just, it's incredible. I know it shouldn't shock me anymore, but maybe it's good that it does shock me. Maybe it means I'm still human or something. But just so the breathtaking mendacity of everybody on Fox, the Sidney Powells and all the Giulianis, all of those people, Donald, obviously. And the other thing that I think is also very important that we did speak about briefly is to keep in mind, and I hope the committee does more with this, how many election workers' lives were threatened, how many of their families were threatened, their livelihoods were threatened. And the reason, I mean, it's important anyway, but it remains relevant because they're resigning en masse. They are, Republican sycophants are looking to replace them to gear up for 2024. So that danger is ever present. And it also should just stain the Republicans who are responsible for this. Is only happening on one side. And I think those are my two or three. I don't even remember. I've lost count. But those are my basic, observations about things that need to be hammered on and developed further. Anybody have any?
You need to think about how cults operate. Speaking as the child of an ex-nun and an ex-Franciscan brother who's learned a lot about cults versus spirituality. If you're part of a cult or a fundamentalist of any religion, you have to believe that you are on the one true side of God. Right. And anyone who opposes you is representing Satan. So true believers are not going to sit down and negotiating things like school curriculum or what gender is or what marriage is with Satan. So when you so firmly have been conditioned your entire life to believe that God hates the same people you do, all vice you can commit is virtue. These people believe they were doing the right thing because it felt good.
And some of them know they weren't. I have.
Wait, just really quickly, Brian. I just want to.
Yeah.
A lot of those people absolutely believed it, and they're still getting indicted for seditious conspiracy. So sorry,
And
Donald,
some
ain't gonna
didn't.
work for you.
I mean, some inside.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I'm sorry. Some inside as the testimony showed, some acted on his behalf while knowing it was wrong as well. I mean, Bill Barr continued
That's
to
right.
act on his behalf while he knew it was. We saw testimony today that he told him it was bullshit. So there are true hardcore believers, no denying that. But there's also people like Donald Trump who took advantage of the situation to their own benefit, and there were plenty of those in Donald Trump's orbit. But at the end of the day, I came down to this. Well, John, I'm a Catholic boy redeemed through pain and not through joy. But Rudy's going down next. Trump will fall, but Bill Barr may outlast them all.
Maybe.
So
I think that's true.
A couple of points. First, I want to follow up on what Dahlia said. I think it gets worse for us, much, much worse for us. We have a Supreme Court that's ready to accept horrible things as legal. It is an Alito court. It's not a Roberts court. And we have all these elections with a public that I'm afraid is going to vote Republican because they're unhappy about larger things and aren't thinking about the consequences. We're going to get governors and secretaries of state and other election officials who are going to be willing to basically deny votes and overturn results. And we're going to get states where the legislature says, we don't care what the voters said, or we don't believe those votes are legitimate, so we're going to certify electors, and you're going to have Alito and probably at least 4 others saying that's their right because they've got total power over what they do. And maybe we're going to get a little bit of protection against that with reform of the Electoral Count Act. It would be it might be like a Maginot Line, I'm afraid. So I'm very uneasy. I'm hoping that the committee will turn at the end to a real focus on what lies ahead and the fact that this was a beta test.
Yeah, they need to for sure. And I think I agree with you. It's an Alito court, but unfortunately, when it comes to voting rights, it's a Roberts court, and he doesn't believe in voting rights. So I think it would be 6-3 against democracy. Quite honestly.
I do. So how do we survive that? Is anyone willing to enter that discussion? Not necessarily for this panel, but how do we survive that moment? That's going to be a decade or two of just.
Well, it's also where the projection comes in that makes it more difficult. They've charged fraud and illegality when it was utterly false.
Yeah.
What happens when we charge fraud and illegality when it's actually true?
Yeah.
It's going to be a slippery slope of credibility traction.
I saw recently a paper that was written by a friend of mine, and I think he's submitting it for his publication for his dissertation. But he suggests that in the future we'd be staring at a nominal federal government and maybe regional governments that decide the cultural issues, and that in so much as the federal government that exists, it will be strictly for infrastructure and defense, and the rest will be thrown back to the
states.
And that is a rather frightening when you see the 6 different divisions that he surmises could occur. It's frightening to me to think about what the future of the United States actually means and how it will play out, and all because of what's been occurring.
Right. So I think there seems to be a need, I think, to continue to put the right words out into the discourse about what it's going to look like. Just like you can see that I don't know what we call it, Team Drunk Rudy and Team Normal or whatever, but you could tell from this testimony today, and I think all throughout the next hearings, that there's going to be a rah-rah, stop the steal, January 6th, we're going to stop the certification, Josh Hawley fist up, but no one really, I think a few people knew what it was going to look like, and they were all on board with that nihilism and violence. But a lot of those folks, I think, then when they're in it and it's actually happening, are like, oh, wait, holy shit, what is this? Wait a minute, which was why that Capitol Police officer's testimony was so important as well. So I think that same thing is happening on a macro level with the Republican Party and even the people who are kind of checked out, but okay, I'm going to vote Republican because of my gas tank. Of like, you don't really know what it's going to look like when we fall.
Right.
You
And
don't
I
really
mean,
know what an
I,
authoritarian state is like to live in.
right.
So it's how do we help people grasp what's going to happen?
Well, we can lay a lot of this at the feet of the mainstream media, of course. But
Thank you. We do our best.
I'm not. You know what I'm saying.
I'm teasing you. You know that.
So, John, yeah. What? I mean, I'm not conceding anything yet.
Right. Nor should you. Nor
but
should you.
no,
Keep in
no,
mind.
no, none of us should.
This is where the power of fear, but real fear for really what's coming, somehow.
I mean, we need to be
capturing that message.
prepared, of course.
Well,
right?
keep in mind, we're going to have a summer where the Supreme Court will overturn Roe v. Wade, and that's going to mobilize
I
voters.
think that's happening this week.
Yeah. Joe Biden's probably going to forgive $10,000 of student loans in the early fall. 50% of people with student loan debt have 20,000 in student loan debt. So it's going to be a huge, huge jolt for the middle class for buying power. But listen, if I had known that the Obama years were the Weimar Republic, I would have spent more time in cabarets. You know, we've been here before. We all thought W and Cheney would ruin the country, and they did.
Yeah.
And we lived through it. Now, the status quo is always more organized, and it takes a lot longer to decode a lie than to spread a lie, as we know. Yeah. And in my lifetime, the only times Democrats have ever gotten the White House were after Republicans had trashed everything. Jimmy Carter got it because of Watergate. Clinton got in there because trickle-down finally stopped working and everyone realized what a fraud it had been. Obama got in because of Bush, who might still be the worst president of my lifetime. I'm not sure. Joe Biden got in because of this guy. The American people chose Hillary Clinton and Al Gore to be president, but the dead slave owners of the Electoral College wouldn't allow them to take office. Only after they wrecked the economy can Democrats become presidents. And then the arsonists always heckle the firing squad. So just remember, there's a lot of things that can change voter turnout. We might get more engaged. Kevin McCarthy becoming Speaker of the House would make me weep for democracy, but it would be great for comedy because it's a cult of selfishness. They will turn on each other. It used to be a conservative party with a white nationalist fringe. Now it's a white nationalist party with a conservative fringe. He will not be able to control the Marjorie Taylor Greens, etc.
He doesn't want to.
They will eat each other alive. And at the end of the day, we're all going to be still struggling for these same causes when we're old, for women's rights, for immigrants, for children, for marginalized people. It's going to be hard always. America's always been a country of struggle, but we have to remember there's more of us. There's more of us than there are of them. More people turned out to vote against the Trump agenda in 2020 than ever in the history of our democracy. Long term, they're going to lose. They will win battles along the way, but we just can't use it as an excuse to give up and be cynical, because that's what gaslighting tries to make.
Yeah. No, I'm not on the doom and despair. Train. I've always avoided that. It's just I think there's a need for a discussion around this is what it will look like. This is what it will be like. This is the loss that we're actually facing. We're actually facing a real loss of something that you can't get back.
Correct.
And so I don't, without it being, despair, and obviously with the motivation, but some real articulation of this is what it's like to live through this. Yeah, a friend of mine is Ruth Benke. I think you guys all know Ruth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we
it's
do
that
well.
discussion,
But we do well at understanding doom cycles. But most people are like, I learned this raising kids. You see a kid running near a pool. You're not supposed to say, stop running, because all they can hear is the running. You're supposed to say, walk slowly. Similarly, if you tell, when you teach, if you tell people, if you don't read this, you're going to fail the exam. Like, who the hell would say that? What you try to say is the positive, right? So we've got to say, what awaits you with electing more Democratic senators or keeping Democrats in power is that we can actually protect abortion rights. Instead of saying, after the Supreme Court takes this away, we can do this. We've got to talk about the inverse. We're going to allow freedom of speech instead of burning books. We've got to have the positive piece. I don't even know how to quite do it. I mean, because the reality is everything that you're talking about is really scary and ugly, but I don't think people respond to that. Like 100,000.
Jen, I feel like
student loans, but maybe we can get enough. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I feel like you and I have been having this conversation for 6 years, because I'm much more of the view that like people need to understand. And the stuff that Norm just laid out, you know, this independent state legislature doctrine that has 4 votes and is probably going to have 5 at the courts to just not let a court review, you know, a decision to have fake electors like that. It's really complicated. And I think in addition to having language, we have to have imagination. And one of the things that's so interesting to me, like watching these protesters, is they have this like capacious imagination for like why they showed up and what they were going to do, and how like God and Donald tasked them with, you know, smashing through the windows and stopping the sort of, like, it's such a bold, imaginative vision. And just to John's point, I mean, not only is the court going to overturn Roe, it's going to expand gun rights and kneecap the EPA. Like, all that is going to happen in 2 weeks. And people are shocked. Like, they don't know it's coming. And I think it's in part a failure. And I totally take your point, Jen, that like the negative versus positive construction of what's coming is important. But I just think we've utterly failed to explain what's coming.
But,
and as a consequence, like the imagination isn't there.
It's cool
Let me
hand
follow
Lou.
up on that with 2 points. First, I agree with Dahlia on this. We have 2 groups of voters that we're trying to reach here. Suburban voters who don't shrink from voting for Republicans and haven't in the past, who have to be made aware that this is a cult, a violent, fanatic cult that will do horrible things. And Democrats who are now disillusioned, demoralized. It's what we usually see in these midterms. They haven't gotten what they want. The positive stuff will help a little bit, but they have to be made aware of the danger to everything that they support. The second point, to make everybody feel worse, is it's not about Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. It's about Jim Jordan as Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. It's about Russian sympathizers heading up the Intelligence Committee and probably leaking terrible information that will undermine the security of the United States.
Norm.
Oh, yeah,
It's
you're
about
right,
people
you're right.
hamstringing
Fucking right. This is a
every
nightmare.
cabinet appointee. And if they win the Senate, there will be no judges,
It's a show
no
unto
executive
itself.
appointees. We're going to have vacancies, not to mention one of the things beyond what Dahlia said, which is they're probably going to make agencies irrelevant in the Supreme Court by knocking out Chevron and doing worse things.
So damn your
we don't let
optimism,
them
Jen.
know how bad this is. We're an even worse.
But so that's the imagination, right? So what you just spelled out right there, that is the kind of storytelling that needs to start being told right now, of like, you're going to have this person on this committee, and this is what's going to happen to our national security. You're going to have this. These are the, I think, an immediate consequences of the horror we're going to face, and then a middle sort of ground of what that's going to be like in 5-10 years, and then the overarching view of we lose this democracy. Good luck getting it back, because these people are operating as the mafia. This is a gangster fucking state right now,
Right.
And you know that's trying to get back in there, take over again, and we know what mafia states look like. So that's sort of maybe parsing it out in sort of immediate, midterm, long-term views of what we're facing. Just everybody understanding every single thing you care about is going to be lost.
Right. And I think we can do both. You know, we can help people understand both. And if nothing else, Dahlia, thank you so much. If nothing else, maybe this helps remind people that democracy is a process and it's something we need to remain engaged in all of the time. It's not like, hey, I voted, then why didn't I get everything I wanted? Well, because it's not that simple. We need to stay in this fight forever, you know, and recognize that if certain things go south in the not too distant future, we're not really going to be able to fight as effectively anymore. So you guys have been with me for so long. I'm so appreciative. You're all just incredible. Again, it was brilliantly done, but I'm feeling pretty despondent. And I think there are reasons to, but the fact that, this committee, these hearings are happening is something to be grateful for. So Norm Ornstein, Brian Karam, John Fugelsang, Stephanie at Lincoln's Bible. I don't even know your last name, which is absurd. You'll have to. Thank you. Dahlia Lithwig, Gentub, thank you for sharing this with me, for your wisdom, for your patriotism, and just for helping me stay sane. We will hopefully see all of you back at some point at the next hearings. And in the meanwhile, stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye.
Thank you.